Call this regularly scheduled meeting to order. If you will join in the salute to our nation's flag. Ready? Begin.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Roll call and declaration of conflicts of interest, please.
Councilmember Abram here, and I will be recusing myself from 8E. Out of an abundance of caution, I have property within 500 feet of the project. Councilmember Bixel,
Here and none.
Vice Mayor Franco,
Here and none.
Councilmember Moniz.
Here and none.
Mayor Bublak.
Here and none. All right. Moving on. Approval agenda as posted or amended.
So moved. Second.
A motion and a second. Will you call the roll, please?
Councilmember Abram.
Yes.
Councilmember Bixel.
Yes.
Vice Mayor Franco.
Yes.
Councilmember Moniz.
Yes.
Mayor Bublak.
Yes. Passes with 5-0. All right. Proclamation. Director Dami, are you ready? There's a lot of people in the back row there.
Yes.
Must be a reason.
Good evening, Mayor, City Council, City staff, members of the public. If we can have all of our volunteers join us at the front of this dais.
Don't run. Taller in the back. Come on, Pastor, you can hurt him.
Very good. Well, it is my privilege to present this proclamation on behalf of Mayor Bublak and City Council in honor of National Volunteer Week, May 21st through the 27th. Whereas volunteers make up hundreds of individuals in our community, representing a wide array of individuals volunteering in various departments throughout the city of Turlock in the following programs: volunteers in police services, police explorers, municipal volunteer partnership program, and Friends of Turlock Animal Services. And whereas throughout volunteerism within local government entities, the quality of life we have grown to rely upon and appreciate is sustained through these community partnerships. And whereas the City of Turlock's volunteer programs are staffed with a group of men and women willing to serve an agency in need of their time, dedication, and talents. And whereas these individuals often serve unnoticed to the public but are indispensable to the City of Turlock. And whereas this City Council understands that government alone cannot solve all of society's needs, and these volunteers transform and extend our limited resources into the ability to provide better service to the City of Turlock. And whereas the City Council recognizes that 2,080 volunteer hours of service equals a full-time employee at wages and benefits in an excess of $82,000. And whereas the public should be knowledgeable about volunteerism and the efforts of volunteerism improving the quality of life in our community. And whereas this City Council does hereby recognize these individuals as true public servants who promote the highest ideals of public service to support the objectives of service to the community, who strive to set an example for others and prove that anyone with drive and determination can be of service to their community. Now therefore, on behalf of the City of Turlock and City Council, we do hereby proclaim our gratitude and admiration by honoring the dedication of these model volunteers who tirelessly give so freely of their valuable time to provide the service to the citizens of Turlock. Thank you all. Chief, did you want to say any words?
Less than 5 minutes.
I just want to thank you all for what you do for the police department in service to our community. You do a tremendous job, not only just being there and helping with the workload, but spotting things on the street, helping our staff through difficult situations, but just being a present around the police department. It's well noticed and we appreciate it, seeing all your faces. Thank you for all you do.
Yeah. Anybody else want to speak?
I just want to say, all you explorers, we expect to see you come through the hiring process as peace officer.
Well,
No pressure.
Hi, my name is George Plisco. I've been a volunteer for 12 years. I just want to say thank you. And on behalf of all the volunteers, you know, we like what we do, so that's why we do it.
we appreciate you. Thank you, guys. Make sure you take some of those pastries when you guys go home. Thank you so much. Chief Hedden, you ready, sir?
Madam Mayor, members of the council, I'm pleased to report the Police Department's 2023 annual report. As we get this report underway each year, I'm very proud at the work that our staff does. Not only the staff here, but the volunteers that we just honored. They do a tremendous amount of work in our community, and we use this time to highlight the work each year. Because I recently spoke about our projects list and hit a number of these items, I'm not going to go into great detail, but I want to hit some areas of the police department just to showcase them as well. Our background unit often works behind the scenes. They're a unit that's not often seen by the public. You generally only meet them if you're applying for a position within the police department primarily, or the city of Turlock, or maybe they're interviewing you or talking to you about a prospective applicant. But they do quite a bit of work behind the scenes and really help us to attract and get the best quality candidates that there are out there. In 2023, they completed 102 background investigations. Through those background investigations, we were able to hire 27 employees within the police department and 5 volunteers. But another number that I wanted to point out, in the last 2 years, the background unit has processed and helped hire 48 new employees of the city of Turlock. This includes the police department and various positions throughout the city. The background unit is comprised of a background coordinator. That was a new position that the council approved. It's a full-time position. 3 part-time background investigators. And really, the background coordinator helps coordinate the overall success of the background unit, but they also help us keep up with post requirements outlined in Senate Bill 2, police officer certification. So that process now requires an attestation from each agency ensuring that the appointee meets the requirements of SB2. Some examples of these include proof of eligibility for lateral police officers prior to hiring, ensuring that the laterals haven't been terminated for one of the serious misconduct categories, ensuring that there's no open investigations, and checking the National Decertification Index. With SB2, California became one of the 46 certifying agencies. So this was a step in a positive direction to ensure compliance. It was something that the California police chiefs supported because we want the best quality police officers representing our community. Got to give a shout out to Animal Services. They do tremendous work. Really, they've had kind of a heavy burden recently with the animal hoarding case, animal abuse case of 70 animals. But we've gone through tremendous lengths to support Animal Services, and I want to highlight that. Last year, we added a part-time rescue coordinator position to help us get animals out of the shelter and have a better chance at a new lease on life. They've created several successful programs. The Foster to Adopt program. This helps us get animals out of the shelter and into their new homes while they wait for spay and neuter to be completed. The vets are backlogged quite a bit. Our Doggy Day Out program, I've hit that before, but that's a very successful program. It's a new program. So far, we've had 14 people in the community take us up on taking an animal out of the shelter for the day. It's been very successful. In my mind, it's early on. But it reduces kennel stress, allows the animals to interact with people, socialize, and it gives them a better chance to present well in the adoption environment. So while I have this slide up, if I could just encourage the community to come out, visit the shelter, and if you can find it in your heart, adopt an animal. Our Code Enforcement Division was established under the Police Department in April of 2022, and they achieved almost full staffing at the end of 2022. So 2023 gave them almost a full year of full staffing. So we've seen tremendous success in the community with that unit. They're currently staffed at 1 supervisor, 1 staff services assistant to support the division, 3 full-time code enforcement officers, and 2 full-time code compliance techs. Through this, as you'll see in the numbers, they've completed 1,295 graffiti abatement cases. They've handled 279 signed cases where they've abated those signs that were illegal in the community. 1,218 shopping carts removed from the community. It's just a staggering number, but as they started this program, it's well north of that 1,200 number. So this is just hitting 2023, and it doesn't account for all of the work that they did in 2022 as they started this abatement program with shopping carts. They've cleaned up 370,000 pounds of garbage from our community and taken 642 trips to Turlock Scavenger. All of that includes a number of Turlock Municipal Code violation contacts, 3,535. So they're just a very busy unit. They care about the community. They're out there helping us clean it up. And we saw a tremendous impact when the police department took on the Code Enforcement Division and the council grew the staffing in the Code Enforcement Division. It's just been a blight in our community is much better than it ever has been. And that is on the backs of the staffing that's doing the work out there. So we appreciate the council's support in that. Our communications division, our dispatchers, run a 24-hour 911 communications center. We also provide services, for those of you who don't know, to Stanislaus State University, to the police department after hours. They're staffed with 17 full-time dispatch positions, 2 are supervisors, and they're currently sitting on 3 vacancies. The dispatch unit handles over 105,000 telephone calls per year. That's 288 per day, or 8,761 per month. They also handle 33,540 911 calls, or 92 per day, and that's generally 2 dispatchers sitting in the comm center, sometimes 3. So please be patient with them when you call. They're working as fast as they can, and we're constantly working on improving customer service within the communication center. Our records unit, another unit that works kind of behind the scenes. When we think of the police department, we might think of dispatchers or police officers, but there's a lot of work that's done to support the efforts of criminal prosecutions, charges filing that's done by the records division behind the scenes. They're responsible for also maintaining our lobby and customer service there. Every police report that is completed is processed through the records division. They ensure that reports are properly routed to the DA, allied law enforcement agencies, etc. And they ensure that our crime data is validated for reporting to the National Incident-Based Reporting System. Last year, they processed almost 8,000 reports, 2,235 supplemental reports, 1,733 CLETS entries. This is stolen vehicle entries, missing persons, stolen vehicles, you name it. 2,201 total arrests processed. That's including routing reports to the DA's office or various agencies for prosecution. And 4,430 reports processed and requested from the community, our residents, insurance companies, allied agencies, et cetera. So they do tremendous work behind the scenes for the police department. To briefly talk about our crime rates, we're trending down. We're below the 5-year projections that were expected for the 2023 year. Crime rate is the number of crimes divided by the current population per 1,000 residents. It was expected to reach 35.9 for the year. However, the rate of Part 1 crimes only reached 26.5 within the year. The total crimes that occurred for the year are projected to reach 2,605. However, there were 1,879 Part 1 crimes reported. This is a 27.9 difference from the expected number of crime for the actual crimes that occurred in 2023. So over the past 5 years, you're looking at the line, the average, we're trending downward at 8%. Part 1 crimes are closely monitored and comprised of 7 out of 10 Part 1 categories. So I just wanted to highlight some of our numbers there. If you follow the black line, you can see that rapes and assaults are trending upwards while our numbers are downward. And that's based on that 5-year calculation and what you can expect. So overall, crime is down in Turlock. Concludes my presentation.
Wow, that's a good conclusion. Questions for the chief? Thank you for everything. Appreciate it. All right, I have a couple of comment cards here, so we will start with that. This is time set aside for the public to talk about things that are not on the agenda, and you have 3 minutes. Ramon.
Good evening, council members and members of the community. Again, I want to address the issues with traffic and infrastructure. Mainly the traffic lights, almost all of Turlock. The lights keep changing fast. When it's green, it lasts 1 or 2 seconds and it turns red. And then when I see people stopping there, other cars running red lights. And then also you have traffic lights that last longer when there are no cars around, and then you got the other cars lining up and people are trying to get it away, and that's why we have so many accidents. Christopherson is the worst because there have been many car accidents, especially last year when a well-known member of the community passed away. That is a wake-up call that we need action to handle traffic because it's getting really bad. I've been seeing people speeding, people running red lights, people having no common sense with driving nowadays, and people are asking we need to have traffic cops around the streets where there are more violations happening. And another topic that I want to bring again is that we need to have affordable housing. There are many areas around Turlock, especially in Monte Vista Crossings, where there's empty plots of land that should have been used to build for housing. And especially that empty land that's in between with Food Max and other stores between in Tuolumne, that needs to be building houses, townhouses, apartments, duplexes, because the more Turlock grows, we need more housing. Then people can't afford $500,000 for a single family home. And also, downtown Turlock needs to bring back to its former glory days. We need to have infrastructure that people will enjoy going downtown by walking instead of having to drive around with cars. More businesses, more housing, and we need to grow because sooner or later people want to go to Turlock, but when they see that Turlock's crumbling down, they're going to change their mind. So we need to invest all of Turlock, and also we need to reduce the car-centric infrastructure that's happening for a couple of years. And that is why we have so many traffic and so many accidents. And people need to find ways just to stay in Turlock without having to move. Thank you.
Dustin?
Justin.
It does say that, huh?
It says Dustin, but that's
Mr.
Justin.
Farkas, Mr. Farkas, it's your turn.
It's been a long day. I'm sorry if I didn't spell my name correctly.
It might have been me.
Well, Turlock City Council and residents, good evening. My name is Justin Farkas, and I have the privilege of serving as a field representative for Assemblyman Alanis. I'm here to share an update on the significant progress in legislation that the Assemblyman has presented so far in the California legislature. In the same vein, sorry, that was from yesterday. In terms of our legislative accomplishments, 13 of the 26 bills we have introduced through the legislature this year have been passed through their respective committees or in various points in the legislative process. 2 of those being in the Senate, 2 are currently sitting on the Assembly floor, and 9 are being held in the Appropriations Committee to determine the fiscal impact of these bills. But they cover several vital areas, including education improvements and introducing new courses like personal finance and enhancing parent communication, supporting our homeless youth and ensuring protections for minors in the entertainment industry, training and resources for public safety officials, tackling crime related to the resale of stolen goods and retail theft, creating greater transparency at the Department of State hospitals and the way they handle placing SVPs or sexually violent predators in our community, requiring age verification for adult websites, and improving accessibility to prescription drug information. With that, Assemblyman Alanis is deeply committed to addressing key issues that influence various aspects of our lives, from health and safety to education and public welfare. And I did bring up the point of one bill, Assembly Bill 3080, which was heard last week, which would require age verification for adult websites. This is a very significant issue. We're starting to see this type of legislation pushed around the country and pass, and I just really request the people within the city of Turlock, be it the council or members of the community, to please reach out to our office and find out how you can assist in this, because we're seeing early exposure to this type of material in young people having drastic effects on their lives, from loneliness to sexual deviancy to other types of abuse and harm. So we would really like your support, and if you have any questions, I'll be here for the remainder of the meeting.
Thank you. I have no other cards. Or does anyone else wishing to speak? John?
I have 3 things that I'll direct to the chief and whatever that I would like to see. Now, it may be in the report, but I don't know. First of all, 911 calls. You said it was 105,000. I remember being over in San Jose. There were lots and lots and lots and lots of calls that should have never been directed to 911. I don't know. Do we have a 311 thing here that connects to the police for non-emergency calls? So if they're having troubles doing that, then the public needs to be educated. There's got to be if it's not really urgent, don't call 911. Okay. The second part that I would like to know is that the referrals to the DA for offenses and everything else like that. I'd like to find out how many are actually adjudicated. In other words, I don't care if it's plea bargained or actually goes to court, and the results of offenses that you guys have done and everything, and what's in. I realize that can take time, but over the years, if you compile it, you'd like to know that said, well, cases we referred in 1920 or 2023, half of them didn't get adjudicated, were let go or whatever. And then the final thing is, I'd like to know if there's things like shoplifting and things like that that you guys don't even bother taking reports, because right now they don't care about it, and and everything else like that. If there's offenses going on that people have reported that may not be sent, but is it not being sent because the DA doesn't want them and won't do anything with them? Thanks.
Anyone else who didn't fill out a card that wants to speak? Bob?
Good to see everybody. I'd like items 8I and 8K pulled, if I could. The thing I'd like to ask is, there's a building at the corner of Golden State and Olive. That's been a shell for the last 4 years, 6 years. And it says it's for sale now. So I guess the person who traded or exchanged into it didn't do that. I think it would be an opportune time for the city to think about buying that building, raising it, combining it with the parking lot next to it, that's a city-owned property, and building like a 3 or 4 story parking garage. It has, at least a few years ago, it was a big thing about not enough downtown parking, and that would solve the problem and get rid of an eyesore in the city. Thank you.
Anyone else? Okay, we'll close the public comment and we'll bring it back to motion waiving reading of all ordinances on the agenda except by title.
So moved.
Second.
We have a motion and a second. We call the roll, please.
Councilmember Abram?
Yes.
Councilmember Bixel?
Yes.
Vice Mayor Franco?
Yes.
Councilmember Moniz?
Yes.
Mayor Bublak?
Yes, passes with 5-0. All right, with consent calendar, I would like to pull C. Charles. We have E. Edward off for Councilmember Abram to recuse. Item I. Ida and item K. King. Are there any other to be considered independently? If not,
So I'll motion to approve the consent calendar with everything. I want to take Councilmember Abram out so she can vote on everything else, and then we can do the other 2 separate.
okay,
Is that okay?
that's fair.
Got that, Madam Clerk? Okay.
That was a motion.
That was a motion.
Second.
Yeah, motion and a second. Will you call the roll, please?
Councilmember Abram? Oh,
Yes. My microphone. Yes.
Councilmember Bixel?
Yes.
Vice Mayor Franco?
Yes.
Councilmember Moniz?
Yes.
Mayor Bublak?
Yes, passes with 5-0. All right, so you want to do all the ones before we do E?
Yeah, let's do E last so she can.
Fair enough.
Yeah.
All right, so item C, I am going to throw a curveball over to Mr. Petrolakis.
Yes, Mayor. Staff wanted to just comment on this. This is the local emergency for homelessness. And so after consultation with the police chief and the city manager, we're likely to, within the next 60 days, probably sooner than that, by the time you would have to next reaffirm it, come back to terminate the local emergency. Based on where things are at and what the police department is doing with the extra code enforcement staffing, we're at the point where we don't think the local emergency is really getting us very much. We also took the unusual step, the interim development services director and I had a meeting with Turlock Gospel Mission about unrelated issues. So we actually asked them if it was helping very much. So, that was unusual for the city since it's really focused on them. And they didn't really think like, for example, I was concerned about some of the conditions in their permit that we were using the emergency to allow them to have the 80 capacity with the local emergency. They didn't seem to think the conditions were an impediment. So if the capacity is needed, it looks like it can be done. So we just wanted to give you a preview on that. And we might have done it this time. I did want to wait through the oral argument yesterday in the Grants Pass case before the U.S. Supreme Court. That was a little mixed. I think probably they're going to be, I'm not in the business of predicting what judges nor justices will do, but I think they're going to give some leeway to cities, it looks like, that the Ninth Circuit took away. It still, I don't know how many times I heard what a complicated local policy issue it was. Even the Supreme Court justices got into that. I felt like I was at one of our local community meetings on the issue because the same issues were coming up from justices of the Supreme Court. So I wanted to wait for that before we sort of aired this. But so anyway, that'll come in the next meeting or two, I think. And I'm happy to answer any questions.
Questions for Mr. Petrolakis? All right, open it to the public. Anyone wishing to speak on this item? Okay, close public comment, bring it back.
Motion to approve 8C.
Second.
We have a motion and a second. Will you call the roll, please?
Councilmember Abram?
Yes.
Councilmember Vixel?
Yes.
Vice Mayor Franco?
Yes.
Councilmember Moniz?
Yes.
Mayor Bublak?
Yes, passes 5-0. All right, we're going to go to item I, Ida, and we'll go ahead and bring up Mr. Puffer and find out what your question is, sir.
Having a professional services agreement with a company to test or something like that for the fire department. And my thought is, why just the fire department? If you're gonna spend this kind of money, why not make it for every employee in the city of Turlock? I understand the fire department is exposed to certain chemicals and stuff that they need to watch out for. I think the same thing is for your gardening staff. And and I'm certain that the same thing would happen with the police department. I don't understand why this is being singled out just for the fire department. Thank you.
Chief Hunter? Whatever you want.
Good evening, Mayor, council members. The reason that we're pushing this forward, I want to start by just recognizing that all of the directors here within the city do a great job looking after the specific needs of the employees within their departments. With respect to firefighters, there's unique hazards that we face on the job, and so this is an effort that we're pushing forward to address the specific hazards and needs that firefighters are faced with, and to have an annual medical that relates specifically to those needs.
Questions for the chief?
Just to reiterate that for these particular type of physical examinations are recommended by the National Fire Protection Association, so it is specific for fire and their needs, whereas all other employees would have annual physicals and things through the health insurance that's provided, correct?
Correct. And these physicals, there's physicals that are done with, that are required by law. So for example, a commercial driver needs to have an annual physical every 2 years. But yes, these physicals are catered specifically through the guidance of NFPA 1582 and 1583 that address specific needs with firefighters.
I would just ask, I mean, I having read this and have a good understanding, I'm familiar with LifeScan, or those, yeah.
LifeScan.
LifeScan, excuse me. Did we look at anything local? I mean, does any of the local providers offer this?
Modesto.
What's that?
Modesto, right?
So the reason why we looked at this specific provider is within Modesto Fire Department. Actually, Modesto Fire Department and Stanislaus Consolidated, they've evaluated and looked at the different providers in the area and this specific provider demonstrated, I believe, over 25 years of experience in doing this specific exam. And so that was the direction for operational alignment between the three agencies.
All right, anyone else in the public wishing to comment on this item? Okay, we'll close public comment, bring it back.
Motion to approve? Second.
Have a motion and a second. Call the roll, please. Thank you, Chief.
Thank you.
Councilmember Abram?
Yes.
Councilmember Vixel?
Yes.
Vice Mayor Franco?
Yes.
Councilmember Moniz?
Yes.
Mayor Bublak?
Yes, passes 5-0. All right, now, the next item is Director Domi, and this is pulled by Bob. Do you want to come up and give us what your query is?
Okay, in order to read this, it sounds like we have a paralegal right now to handle some of the small stuff, I'm assuming, at the front counter. And now we want to hire a trainee or someone under her and promote her. And looking at this thing, it said to help the city attorney. Well, we're paying a firm to handle our city attorney affairs a great deal of money. And now we're hiring employees that are gonna be subject to PERS and all the other perks, to do the work. And it was my understanding that one of the reasons we went to an outside firm was to get away from PERS and all these other perks. And if we are gonna start hiring employees like this, well, maybe perhaps we should start a search for a city attorney, full-time, on staff. Thank you.
Anyone else wishing to speak on this item? Okay, we'll close public comment. Director Dummy?
Thank you, Mayor. The item before you this evening is for City Council consideration in addition of a full-time position and approval of the establishment of a new job description for an executive legal assistant, paralegal, to be part of the unrepresented confidential group. After much review, staff have determined this request is appropriate to meet the business needs and increasingly complex demands of the city attorney office functions, as well as the city manager's direct executive support. This support is especially needed in performing the complex, difficult, confidential, and paralegal services. The incumbent reviews all city staff reports, including agreements, resolutions, and ordinances by city staff before they're submitted to the city clerk for agenda preparation, as well as prior execution of documents. In addition, the incumbent insists in the review of contracts, agreements relating to insurance endorsements as it relates to risk management.
Questions for the director? Okay, what is the will?
Motion to approve 5K?
Second. A motion and a second. Will you call the roll, please?
Councilmember Abram?
Yes.
Councilmember Pixel?
Yes.
Vice Mayor Franco?
Yes.
Councilmember Moniz?
Yes.
Mayor Bublak?
Yes, it passes 5-0. Thank you, Director Dami. All right, and now item E. We will slowly talk about it. Yeah. All right, so she just is conflicting because she owns property, so I'll open it to the public. Anyone wishing to speak in regard to this item? Close public comment, bring it back.
Motion.
Second.
Third.
Fourth.
All right, that pretty much did our roll call, but go ahead.
Councilmember Pixel?
Yes.
Vice Mayor Franco?
Yes.
Councilmember Moniz?
Yes.
Mayor Bublak?
Yes, passes 4-0 with a recusal. Final readings, none. Public hearing, 10A.
Sure.
It is continued, but I will open it to the public if someone came to speak on that item. Okay, closing public comment, and it will be on May 14th meeting. And now, I'm sorry? Did you need me to do something?
Motion to continue that?
Look at that.
Second.
All right. We have a motion and a second. Will you call the roll, please?
Councilmember Abram?
Yes.
Councilmember Pixel?
Yes.
Vice Mayor Franco?
Yes.
Councilmember Moniz?
Yes.
Mayor Bublak?
Yes, 5-0. All right, now we have approving the fiscal year annual action for the Community Development Block Grant. The new lady in town. Ms. Figueroa, here we go. Welcome.
Good evening, Mayor, members of council. The item before you is a recommended approval and submission of the fiscal year 2024-25 annual action plan. The annual action plan covers the Community Development Block Grant, also known as the CDBG, for the city of Turlock, and home funds for the Turlock Stanislaus Home Consortium, which includes the county and all the cities except for the city of Modesto. The annual action plan is required by HUD to identify how home and CDBG funds will be spent to implement the goals established by the 5-year consolidated plan. It also provides the public an opportunity to comment on the proposed plan. Fiscal year 2024-25 is the final year of implementing the 2020-2025 consolidated plan. The goals in the current consolidated plan are: increase and improve the supply of affordable housing, work to end and prevent homelessness, improve infrastructure and public facilities, provide public services, community emergency response, and administration. This chart shows our anticipated resources for fiscal year 2024-25. We will not receive an annual allocation for the home, as we're no longer the lead. The annual allocation will go to Stanislaus County to administer as the lead. For home, we are estimating approximately $5.4 million. in carryover and an estimated $110,000 in program income. These funds are available to all members of the consortium. For CDBG, we're estimating $613,116 based on the current year allocation, with an estimated $130,000 in program income. HUD has not released the actual 2024 amount at this time. I actually did reach out to the HUD representative to inquire about the allocation, and they indicated that they do anticipate a decrease but couldn't confirm the amount. So to ensure timely submission of our annual action plan, we're using the prior year estimation. The draft annual action plan proposes $148,623 in program administration, $281,177 in housing rehabilitation, $243,316 in affordable housing, and $70,000 in public service grants. As part of the CDBG allocation, 15% of the allocation plus 15% of the program income from the previous year can be spent on public services. This slide depicts the 7 nonprofit agencies and amounts recommended by the CDBG Grant Selection Committee. A separate item will be presented later on the agenda to recommend authorization to execute the contracts. For home, we're proposing approximately $1.4 million for residential rehabilitation. This category can be used to issue homeowners loans and grants to rehabilitate their property. Approximately $3.8 million for affordable housing. This category can be used for the construction of affordable housing units. Staff is looking into obtaining a consultant to write a NOFA to be released consortium-wide, and $300,000 in first-time home buyer funds. That concludes my presentation, and I'm available for any questions you may have.
Questions for Ms. Figueroa?
Yes, I'm wondering if you can just give us some kind of rough ballpark idea of, in the categories of this annual action plan, how does the breakdown of funds kind of compare to what we've done in years before for different annual action plans? Like percentage that goes to affordable housing, percentage that goes to first-time home buyer. Is this in line with what we've been doing, or are we changing it up a little bit?
You know, I haven't had a chance to look at prior years at this point in the 5 weeks I've been here.
What?
But I absolutely can look into that and get back to you.
Other questions for her? Go ahead.
Be nice. She just got here.
I absolutely.
5 weeks.
Welcome, by
Thank
the way.
you. Thank you.
Are we still considering acquisition of properties? I know it says in various places, the council has said several times, we don't want to acquire anymore. We
Yeah,
would like to rehab and do other things.
Yeah.
So I'm wondering why we keep putting in there acquisition.
And I believe that's for the consortium-wide funds, so that would be something that would, go out to the consortium through the NOFA.
Okay.
I do know, it is my understanding that the council wants to move forward with more of the home rehabs and the first-time home buyers. So we're actually looking to move some of the projects that we've had outstanding forward so we can focus on that.
Good. Regarding the pending projects, the staff reports states we have a fourplex that we intend to sell to or give to WeCare, and we had an RFP. Can council, or at least me, can I get a copy of that
Absolutely.
RFP? Because I don't ever remember seeing it, and I'd like to know the details of that.
Absolutely, we will get that to you.
Thank you. And then we do own 4 properties still. 2 of them are vacant. And again, this goes to acquisition. So if we still have 2 vacant, acquiring more isn't going to be
Correct.
helpful to anybody. I did one more thing. Sorry.
You can read that.
I can read my own writing. Can you believe that? On the homeless prevention, can we see some sort of an update on how we're making a difference? So we can see, hey, we placed X number of dollars with this for homeless prevention, and this number of people got into housing, transitional, permanent. So we can see how our dollars are actually helping.
And then that is all my questions. Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Anybody else? Okay, we'll open it to the public. Anyone wishing to speak on this item? Ms. Warner? Okay, we'll close the public comment, bring it back. Other comments?
Yes, I have some comments. So, Ms. Figueroa, I know that when annual action plans come up, con plans, capers, they all have to follow a certain format that HUD wants to see it in. And, you know, every time one of these comes up, it feels like we're kind of just looking at things in a silo. So I would like to see the housing department explore having, I don't know, maybe it's a table or a report or something that gives us a look back on what have we done for annual action plans, and then try to incorporate some of the information from the capers too, because you know, the capers are really like the report card. The annual actions, the year plan, the con plans, the 5-year plan, and when it comes to, like, you know, the analysis for the public, for all of us, I think having seeing trends in the full picture would make a lot more sense. You know, I will bring up, even though this is an annual action plan, our most recent caper and a few years prior, with respect to CDBG funds, have shown that the public service grants are really the area in CDBG where we're getting the money out and getting it used by the most number of people, whereas other categories it's a handful of, you know, residents helped. So I would like to float to my colleagues about increasing the public service grant amount by, you know, conservatively another $21,000, which can explain why that number, because we have 7 applicants for this year, but to really maximize what we can do, and I would propose we take it out of the affordable housing CDBG to balance it out.
My comments are on the same CBDG, but probably on the other side. I sit on the CBDG committee, and I have some concerns about some of the grants, at least one of them. I know I was not the only person that had some issues with the We Care grant. It shocked me when I heard that only 45% of the 330 overnight stays, unduplicated overnight stays, were Turlock residents. 21% were out of the county stays. They didn't even live or go homeless in Stanislaus County. And 28%, 93 people came from Modesto. Modesto gets their own CBDG money. Other counties get their own CBDG money. 6% came from other cities within the county, and they also get CBDG money from Stanislaus County. So it doesn't make sense to me for the citizens of Turlock to foot the bill for other areas. We should be responsible for Turlock's homeless, but not for outside of the county and Modesto. So with that, I would motion to amend the annual action plan to give We Care $4,500 instead of the $10,000, because that is the 45% of the stays for the Turlock people, and then all the others can remain the same.
Second.
Any other comments?
I guess I have a clarifying question on your motion. You're suggesting we keep the $70,000 less the what? $5,500 difference?
And the $5,500 can go back into the repairs and of the housing, so that we can upgrade our housing stock in the in the city. So I'll amend my motion to that.
For the 5,500. Is that your amended second?
But I just have a question first.
I'm not trying to make you do anything.
Do we have $21,000 somewhere else for the people? Because I agree with what she said. The citizens of Turlock should not be footing the bill for the rest of the world. That's not fair. And we can't expect Turlock taxpayers and Turlock money to pay for that. Do we have an extra 21 grand to up to the people that you want to increase on? But I would never agree to increase on something like that where they're servicing non-Turlock folks.
Well, so,
make sense?
yes, and so I'll explain my idea, and I vetted this with Ms. Figueroa earlier, that based on CDBG, we can put up to 15% of the allocation toward the public service grants. $70,000, which I know this is a separate item we'll get into a little bit later, but $70,000 just kind of seems like we've always done 10,000 each. We got 7 people, so that's where we got that number. I believe it's this staff's report or the next one says 15% of what we're expecting is somewhere in the $111,000 range. So, you know, conservative, knowing what might come in a little bit under that, giving more to the public service grant recipients in whatever way the council deems fit to divvy that up, I think is a good use of money to increase it. So long-winded way to say, yes, I believe we do.
Okay. And just so we're all on the same page, I'm not opposed to increasing, if that money is there and we're increasing it for people that are helping, for providers that are helping Turlock people, let's go.
Can I ask one follow-up question to, well, whatever the motion is on the floor right now? Vice Mayor Franco brought up the idea of We Care only serving people that have claim some residency somewhere else. Do we, as a member of the CDBG committee, do we ask all the other inhabitants about, Haven domestic violence survivors, where they live? And do we have that data for every other applicant?
Most of the other applicants volunteered, as did We Care. That was not asked of We Care. She absolutely volunteered that information to the CDBG committee. Most of them do help Turlock. They did not state whether or not it was fully Turlock or not. If they had, I would, and they helped other communities, I would say the same thing. But this is the only one that I know of that actually said we help 45% Turlock and 55% outside of Turlock. It is perfectly within their realm to help anybody they want to. I have no problem with that. I'm responsible for Turlock's money, and I'm responsible to the Turlock taxpayers, and their taxpayers' money should be spent on Turlock people. That's my thought.
I mean, I just want to respond to that we're potentially making an unfair criteria for one applicant over the others if we're not asking everybody else, please define the population that you're serving. I have some just, rhetorical questions on how do we really define the residency of a person who's experiencing homelessness, and if they are, wanting to spend the night at We Care and they're already in Turlock, if they're not going to We Care, they're going to be in front of a business, in an alleyway, in a park, somewhere else in Turlock. So I hear your points. I disagree with them, but if I can get my colleagues to agree to spending more in public service grants in general, and we can decide on the item 11B or whenever it comes up, how to divvy that up, I'm open for that.
So Vice Mayor, what's your motion as it sits right now?
My motion as it sits is to amend the annual action plan to reduce the We Care program by $10,000, which would be, by $5,500. So the $70,000 in the public service grants would be reduced by that $5,500, and that $5,500 would be moved to the housing rehabilitation. So it would be $281,177 plus $5,500, and then the public service grants would be $70,000 less the $5,500.
So one of the things, this is our last consortium effort, right? So I'm sure that CDBG is giving money to Modesto for them to give to We Care as well, probably, because they're sending people this way. We are responsible for the other 8 cities, right? So, I mean, I get that, but the statistical anomaly is that Modesto and Stanislaus County are getting a lot of money, and we're kind of covering for them, and I'm not a fan of supporting the people that aren't helping us. So I would agree that this makes more sense, and if we're trying to set some sort of a new standard, this is our last go, so I don't know if we want to get too far into creativity.
Well, and this is CBDG.
Understood.
Home funds are split,
Right.
but CBDG funds are specific to Turlock.
us.
We get our own, and then Modesto gets
Modesto
theirs.
gets their own.
Stanislaus County gets theirs to
Right.
give to everybody else.
Second.
Call the question?
Councilmember Abram?
No.
Councilmember Bixel?
No.
Vice Mayor Franco?
Yes.
Councilmember Moniz?
Yes.
Mayor Bublak?
Yes. Passes 3-2. Thank you so much and welcome to our team.
Welcome to Turlock.
All right. Action item 11A. Mr. Hampton.
Good evening, Mayor, members of council. Before you this evening is a review of the contracted services of Cohn Resnick, a contractor that the city employed to pursue an audit of the housing program. As you certainly had an opportunity to read over the rather large report, tonight what I hope to do is I hope to try to minimize it into the specific topics that were identified as problematic for the housing department, along with recommendations how we will ensure that they do not reoccur. The analysis completed by the contractor, I'm not going to restate their name every time. They're not going to get free advertisement from us. So the analysis completed did not necessitate an audit, review, or compilation following general accepted auditing standards or generally accepted accounting principles. The analysis focused on policies, procedures, and compliance therein. The time period of the review coincided with significant personnel turnover, as well as the housing division and housing division manager positions within the Development Services Department completely turning over in staffing. So your current housing department may possibly have one employee that was in training at the time that some of these events occurred, but I'm more inclined to say and assure you that the past employees are the past. They're not the current employees. So as I deliver this report, I'll ask the members of our community to recognize that this report does not reflect the work of your current housing staff. It reflects the work of your previous housing staff. The contractor was tasked with gaining an understanding of the city's policies and procedures as they relate to the procurement and purchasing, accounts payable, vendor acceptance, and maintenance, and conflicts of interest. In addition, the contractor also needed to understand the city's community development block grant program and home investment partnership program, same as you just heard, in order to address concerns in the U.S. Department of Housing and Urban Development's August 23, 2022 monitoring letter. Just as a quick reminder, at your last council meeting, staff presented to you some 327 pages of policy and procedure changes as a result of work that the city completed with a professional organization that specifically is recommended by HUD in updating our policies. It's not just our policies, it's HUD across the U.S. They adopt new policies at least every 24 months, sometimes every 12 months. So we were due for the update, and it just so happens that the update coincided with this audit, but they are not related in any manner whatsoever. The letter issued by HUD in 2023 has now been cleared by the adoption of those policies, so we are now in full compliance of all HUD regulations. You know, as I'm sure you've read through this report, you've also noticed references to the COVID-19 pandemic being a disruptive influence on the city's ability to meet the HUD funding obligations. Additionally, significant organizational changes within the city and housing divisions led to a lack of clear guidance on the allocation of HUD grants. The report highlights that in response to HUD's concerns about investment timelines, low demand for first-time homebuyer loans, and fewer qualifying applicants, the housing division heavily relied on purchasing and rehabilitating properties as a main strategy to utilize HUD funds. I can tell you one of the purposes of doing that is the more money that a city pushes out, the more money they are eligible to receive in the following years. the less money that's spent, that's held over, the less money that HUD is going to issue to the city. Given the conditions that COVID brought forward, it was assumed by the housing staff at that time that it would be beneficial to the city to push out as much money as they possibly could. And that was done through, as you know, the purchasing of homes and flipping those houses. And I share that with you because it's been stressed to me in my short term of employment. So remember, I'm short term, so be nice to me too, please. Just keep in mind that COVID really did challenge all cities across the United States in trying to meet some of HUD's standards relative to pushing money out. But the flipping of houses became a very unique program here in Turlock, and the current housing staff is still cleaning up behind the fallout from those purchases during the COVID period. The contractors selected a sample of housing division expenditures and performed testing to determine compliance with applicable policies. So it's a very simple audit. They may identify one procedure and determine how many steps that procedure requires. And it's not unreasonable to look at one step in an overall procedure and identify anywhere from 12 to 25 different measurable events that needed to occur, whether it's completing a form, notifying an individual, sending an email, whatever it may be. They look to see what the percentage of compliance is. And it's not uncommon at all to see some 125 to 200 different checks in steps to complete a process. So this audit was taken on back in 2023, and it's just before you now. It's not a lack or an effort by the city. It's a long, drawn-out process. And it takes a while for everyone to consume the information, as well as wait for me to get up to speed in it on this issue in the last month and a half, 2 months that I've been here. With respect to the contractor's reference to the lack of operational policies and procedures, as I mentioned earlier, they also recognized that we were working with a consultant at the time to update our policies and procedures, and so they did make that note in their findings. So they clarified that we were just not leaving it unresolved. What I would like to do is I would like to go through the findings. I'll go through as rapidly as I possibly can, but the primary findings in the audit covers, I think, 11 primary findings, and then I make one final request of council for consideration. If you look at finding number 1, the housing division lacks documented policies and procedures. We've beat this horse dead 3 times. We do have policies and procedures. They're consistent with, today they are consistent with HUD standards. They address and update the current CDBG policies and procedures, the CDBG monitoring plan policy and procedures, the home policies and procedures, and created the home monitoring plan, as well as created residential anti-displacement relocation policy and plans. Those are now all adopted as formal policies that all housing staff are required to comply with. So the response that staff would offer relative to item number 1 is it's been reviewed, it's been addressed, it's been corrected, it's done and in the past. However, understand that we'll be updating those policies within the next 24 months, again, if not sooner. The second item that the contractor addresses in their final report, the contractor acknowledges the city has a general conflict of interest policy, however, has identified that they were not provided with that policy or procedure, nor documentation demonstrating that such policy was followed. Therefore, they conclude that the housing division did not perform a conflict check for any sellers or purchasers or subject properties, nor any contractors bidding on the related rehabilitation project. They're absolutely clear on the fact that there was not conflict checks on many of the purchasers, some of the sellers, some of the applicants, whether they're even qualified. However, I want to make clear that the city of Turlock does in fact comply annually with the aforementioned government code 87300, wherein the city and all of its employees that are subject of conflict reporting comply annually. That policy and procedure is implemented by the city clerk's office and requires signed verification of either their conflicts or non-conflicts that currently exist. So, however, I would be remiss not to point out to you that later on in the agenda, our city attorney will be addressing even a greater detailed conflict of interest code that addresses other specific laws that are not necessarily related, but are absolutely related and would have solved a lot of our problems had we had the benefit and foresight to know that those were coming out. So as I understand it, this is a brand new ordinance the city attorney will be bringing forward, and you'll hear that later on. So rest assured that we're not minimizing the conflict of interest. Those checks were not done by staff. It was not picked up by the management overseeing those staff, as well as the department director. And out of full disclosure, I was a director in 2018 for you. I actually was a city manager. I did not verify myself that they were completing the check and balance. Not that it is the required of the city manager. It's absolutely not. The city manager's looking at me like, what are you talking about? It's not our responsibility. It's not the city manager's responsibility, but I'm sure somebody from the community is likely to say, well, wait a minute, Gary Hampton was set in the city manager chair for some time. Did he make those checks? I did not. It was not a requirement, but, you know, quite honestly, hindsight's 20/20. I wish I would have. So, currently, the city of Turlock does comply annually with the aforementioned government codes that I've outlined for you. And the interest code is administered and overseen by the city clerk's office, and all staffing is required. In fact, we all just received our notification to complete our compliance filings with the city clerk's office. The third point that the contractor brings up was the fact that the city is not providing, or the city did not provide the contractor with any documentation demonstrating the buyers of properties sold by the city were on an approved first-time home buyers list or any other pre-approved list at the time of the sale. The housing division was unable to provide support regarding the qualifications and approval process for buyers of properties sold by the city. Staff's response to that is that we should have. There's no excuse for it. In fact, it should be part of our application program. They should have to complete that information and divulge it to us, and we have a legal obligation to actually research to make sure that it's accurate. So relative to this issue, the policy issue will be addressed in my later recommendations on how we're going to resolve this. But what it comes down to is that the process will ensure an equal and documented process is used for selecting eligible buyers. This policy shall be contained within a housing division operations manual. So you've heard about the policies, you've seen the policies. They're specifically to HUD programs and funding. They're not specific, nor do they direct whatsoever the day-to-day operations of a housing department. In fact, our own city policies have relevant statements for all city employees to comply with certain things like conflict resolution. But it does not address the uniqueness of the housing department. So you'll see later on, I am recommending that the housing department adopt a full policy manual that addresses their day-to-day operation. It's also a resource if they're not sure, if we have new staffing come in, if they're not sure exactly how to fulfill a process, it's in the manual. This is not a new concept. It's It's throughout government, it's in law enforcement, it's in all public safety. It's not a new concept. So the next item, as I try to rush through this, the contractor pointed out that the city did not provide any documentation demonstrating that tenants of properties currently owned by the city were on an approved list or any other support regarding the qualification and approval process. My research, what I was able to discern is that current tenants in the city-owned properties were existing tenants. So we purchased the property and they were existing tenants, so they didn't come off of a list. And at the time the properties were purchased, we have a responsibility to either rehouse them, relocate them, or leave them where they are. And in nearly all instances that I can find, they were left in the residence that they were already in. Other tenants were relocated in available housing units through the assistance of the U.S. Veterans Administration. The Housing Division does not plan on making future purchases or having properties in which the city of Turlock has selected tenants. So we relied on the Veterans Department to do our work. That's not their role. We can't expect them to take on that responsibility. But they did happen to be on their lists, and so we took them off their list. If you ask me, Gary, so how is their list developed? How do you qualify to get on the list? I couldn't answer that question for you. I made a few phone calls, and the answers that I got was, gee, we've never been asked that. So it could be that the Veterans Administration is in the same boat that the city of Turlock finds itself currently. Not necessarily this report. I'm talking about in having the foresight to have a policy how we select tenants in properties. If in fact we do get back into the business of purchasing and rehabbing houses and putting tenants into them, then at that time the city council should expect a policy to be brought forward and adopted right along with many of the other policies that we have within the city of Turlock. Not just an operational procedure in housing, but an actual policy adopted by council. The fifth item, the contractor was not provided with any documentation demonstrating that the contractor submitting bids for rehabilitation work were previously vetted and or included on an approved vendor list. Currently, the Housing Division, and not only currently, but in the past 8 to 10 years that I can recall, the Housing Division maintains a list of active, eligible, and vetted contractors in accordance with the adopted rehabilitation policies and procedures and guidelines. And this is an issue addressed in the HUD policies. So, and the city is in compliance with those to some degree. But again, we didn't offer up any proof of that to the auditors, so therefore they found us out of compliance. Prior to a contractor being awarded a bid, the contractor's license number is checked through the Contractor State Licensing Board website to ensure it is active. The contractor also has to provide their DUNS number, and this is checked as well as the debarred list. So we have to make sure that they're registered, their identities are proven through the registration. We know who we're dealing with. It's just not a fictitious name. In addition, the Housing Division has implemented a practice of mailing out letters once a year to all general licensed contractors within Stanislaus County, inviting them to provide their information to be vetted and added to the eligible contractors list. So yes, we didn't provide them with the material, but I don't necessarily make the same finding that they make relative to that we're not in compliance. We are in compliance, we just didn't provide them the material. And it may be because it took some time to dig that up, but in fact it has been occurring. Item 6, the contractor found that all property testing files reviewed included a form wherein the city waived a buyer's inspection as part of a purchase documentation. So the housing staff decided in the interest of expediting the purchases, we waived the buyer's inspection of the house. Although we do And we did at the time have housing specialists who will walk through a house and estimate the cost of rehabbing the house. They're not engineers. They don't understand anything about structural concepts of a house. We don't know if the foundation's good or bad. We don't know if the structural frame itself has been altered in any way that makes it unsafe. So I absolutely concur with the finding. We missed an opportunity to minimize our liability when we buy these houses and then turn around and flip them. We also ensure that we don't go over budget by bringing in experts. So you will hear later again about the manual of policies and procedures that will require us to complete inspections before we buy any property. Whether we have the time or not, it needs to be done. We should not be investing public money into buildings that cost us several $100,000s to rehab, and then we sell it for several $100,000 less than we have into it. It's just not a good practice, and we have a fiduciary responsibility to guard the public's money. Number 7, I'm almost there. Cone Resnick, the contractor, found that none of the property testing files included documented support from the housing rehabilitation specialist demonstrating review and approval of the work performed by the rehabilitation contractor prior to approving progress payments. The reviewed property testing files only contain proof of invoice approval and payment. As we talked with our finance department, we talked with our current housing staff, we were able to identify that we did do this. But previously, we were setting up escrow accounts, and escrow accounts were making payments, and we were using the housing specialist inspection report as the documentation authorizing a payment. Through the assistance of our finance department, it was clear that that process wasn't working out. In fact, they were making payment before we did that in several cases, which does not reflect well on us. As a result, the housing department switched to working directly with our own finance department, and they were remitting all payments. And it's taken through the finance system just like any other payment in the city. You have to have certain documentation that has to be reviewed and accepted by finance before they'll issue payment. And that's exactly how it's worked for the last year. Unfortunately, that information did not get translated for the contractor. We are in compliance. The finance department holds housing to the same standard as every other expenditure in the city, and the problem was resolved thereafter. But that's only been in place for, Isaac, 6 or 7 months? Is it? Okay. The contractor also reports the majority of the contractor's invoices contained in the property testing files lacked specific detail regarding actual work performed and only cited a progress payment number. These invoices appear to have been paid by the city without further supporting detail. The housing division required detailed invoices from contractors which identified the type of work completed and correlation with the scope of work identified within the contract. Often the scope of work completed is identified by a specific number within the contract, which is reflected in the payment request. It's not a foolproof process, and so that's been cleaned up as well as we work with our own finance department. They're not going to remit payment unless we can demonstrate that we have an invoice. The invoice is submitted prior to payment, not after payment, which is what was happening with the escrow companies. And so we're sure we've corrected that issue. Escrow accounts the review of the escrow accounts found that the accounts were established for most properties purchased in rehabilitation of housing division. However, there was inconsistency. In some cases, it was handled without an escrow account, and this is before we went through our own finance department. So it is a problem that was resolved prior to this audit. It's just not disclosed in the audit because we didn't submit the file. When I say we, there was many staff working to provide the information. Many staff in development services, let's be clear, it didn't come from the city manager's office or from housing, or I'm sorry, from finance. It came from housing. And had a very difficult time finding the documents so that we could submit them. Number 10, the use of escrow accounts and an escrow agent did not appear to be working. And as I mentioned, so we went to the finance department, and it's worked quite well. I'm not going to keep harping on the escrow accounts because they were very problematic for the auditors. They cite the escrow accounts on 2 or 3 different platforms of why it was problematic, up to and including, you heard me mention just a minute ago, making payment without invoices, and the invoices, the payment predating the invoices, which was hugely problematic for the auditing firm. And then finally, the consultant identified that there appeared to be confusion regarding updates to the construction documents, which has purportedly delayed the housing division from starting the bidding process for rehabilitation work on several homes previously purchased by the housing division, and those homes are now sitting vacant and becoming community blight. It is a problem that currently exists. We're working with housing to try to make sure that they're safe, to make sure that we're dealing with the blighted issues, doing some maintenance on them, and we're working as quickly as we can to actually get those rehabilitated, bring back to you a proposal, first-time buyers, and get them out of our inventory so that we don't have this problem reoccurring. Finally, I've mentioned a couple of times about the manual of policies and procedures. It's critical for housing to have a policy and procedure manual that is overseen by not only department director, but also by the unit manager, so the housing manager. And if it's not in writing, it didn't happen. And so we want to make sure it's in writing. We want to make sure they're in compliance. What you will find in the future is that the public is going to be required to provide us with more information. They're going to need to get pre-qualified to receive benefits and services. We need to maintain that documentation, and we need to ensure that we're prepared to undergo an audit anytime it's ordered by whoever it's ordered by. It is my primary recommendation to adopt the policy manual immediately. It's not necessarily an action required by council, but we would like to hear your feedback. And then finally, I would urge the city to consider a follow-up audit in 36 months. It gives the organization a chance to get things in place, operational, get the housing department fully staffed and operational, so that we can then go back and we can vet whether or not the policies are working, whether or not we're having any issues with conflict. We're putting the ownership on the applicants as well to make sure that they don't have a conflict. As you know, I'm sure you've read the report. It's made clear that we've engaged in sales of properties that had conflicts, and we should not have engaged in those sales, and we certainly should not then have bought it back at a later period of time, which was also a conflict. So that concludes my report. I tried to shorten this as much as I could and still have it make sense, but I know that through your outreach to me with questions, I know that you've all read this page by page, and I know that none of you are happy with it. So,
Questions for Mr. Hampton? Let me ask one. You've heard me ask this in many, many settings, but so motion is to accept it, the report. What if we don't?
defer to the city attorney on that and let him give you the recommendation. I have one, but I'll allow the attorney to do it.
No, go ahead, please.
I would strongly urge you to accept the report that you expended significant community resources on, and it's a report that we can refer to at later times. If it's not accepted, it'd be very difficult for us as a department to carry out the recommendations.
Other questions from Mr. Hampton?
And that is not one of them. There's several mentions of the loan committee in various documents. Who makes up of the loan committee and how did it come about? Because I know since I've been on the council, we've never ratified a loan committee. We've never even talked about a loan committee, and usually we're approving the committee. So I want to know how it came about, who's on it, and then I want to see if we can revise that so the council picks the loan committee, at least the positions, not necessarily the people, or maybe the people too. That's first question.
So there's been no consistency in how people are appointed to the loan committee. And it is not an appointment that is validated through city council. It is an appointment that comes out of the housing department, and it's an amassing of individuals within the community that has a business background or banking background.
Sometimes there were only two people, and it read like it was two employees, two staff members of the housing department. I find that to be quite disturbing. So was it two employees?
Well, my understanding is there's two employees that were in attendance, and they went ahead and carried out
It was two employees.
the
Okay.
task at hand, but that did not comprise the entire loan committee.
Okay.
It was a judgment error.
Okay. All right. Cool. Second question. The page 3, somewhere in the middle, refers to some confusion regarding construction documents. What was the confusion about the documents? What made it so confusing that we couldn't even go out to bid on those houses?
Lack of detail. So what one would,
So
talk to our
no,
public works departments, the scope of work.
no scope,
Well, there was a scope of work, but it's far too general to actually identify exactly
What was wrong
whether
with the
or not
house?
the work was completed in accordance with the contract and should payment been made.
Okay. So we've got two houses now that sit vacant because we didn't have our scopes of work up to snuff and no one knows how to bid? Why do we have two vacancies with no construction being done?
Primarily due to the turnover of the housing department and the messaging that no more purchasing, no more flipping until we get to the bottom of where we are as a housing service unit. And there's nothing wrong with purchasing and flipping houses. It's just somewhat complicated to engage in. Our housing department was not serving as a pass-through of funding to the community to get them into a house. We were literally serving as a general contractor.
Right. I've done it
hiring
myself.
subcontractors. That's not a
We've
role
flipped
that we
houses
want to be
before
in.
too. I would love to get out of that business. Last question is why do we still own 829 and 831 Vermont? They were new construction, no rehab needed. We bought them for $720,000. Wow, that's a pretty big price. The RFP was in December 2023, but at least they're not vacant. Why do we still own them?
I do not have an answer for you.
I'm not picking on you. I'm just
that's
I'm
okay.
just asking questions.
Yeah, I can
you
take
you stepped into it up
I'm
to
like
here.
a Timex watch. Go ahead.
That's all my questions. I have lots of comments.
Councilmember Bixley, you have a question?
Well, yeah, I guess I would say, number one, thank you for the work you're doing to clean up the mess that you inherited. My question really pertains to looking forward, not necessarily looking backwards. We can beat this until it's already been beat and beat and beat. Are you confident going forward that we will not have this mess?
I'm confident we'll put a system in place that will prevent this type of failure in the future. The question is, will we have supervisory and mid-management oversight to the degree that does the necessary checks and balances? It's critical. I was even somewhat surprised on the amount of money that we were pushing out of housing after COVID, during COVID. And there were a lot of intentional shortcuts and a lot of unknown shortcuts. And there was no checks and balances, zero. Does that answer your question?
Well, yes. I mean, I guess what I'd like to hear from you is that you have a plan to put the people in place that can make this not happen again.
We absolutely do, and you just met the housing manager, and with a financial background, an accounting background, and my first recommendation is the city needs to serve as the bank in support of our community. We need to accept the federal funds, and we need to put contractors to work doing construction and contract management people in place to manage contracts and so on and so forth. But asking staff, well, I'm not even sure they were asked, but for staff to carry out procedures that they have no experience in is a recipe for disaster. That is absolutely going to be addressed in the policies and procedures.
Any other questions for Mr. Hampton? Okay, let's open it to the public. Anyone wishing to speak on this item? Close public comment and come back. I'm sure all of us have something to say. Councilman, you want to start? All right.
I was going to say, I appreciate your candidness, and go forth and be well.
First of all, I really appreciate what you're doing for us. My questions and comments are in no way of the current staff, but I am going to beat the dead horse a little bit. I had concerns and questions and fears about this department, and I wanted the forensic audit, a deep dive into what my fears were, and we didn't quite get the forensic audit, but the audit we did revealed that my worst fears were reality. Staff was running amok. I don't feel like the audit went deep enough, but it's more than obvious. My suspicions were confirmed. The report focused on procedures, and so we didn't get into the depth of what potentially could have happened. Obviously, the generally accepted accounting principles weren't followed. The generally accepted audit principles weren't followed. HUD, nothing was followed from HUD. The report is pretty clear that we had some major problems. We lacked policies and procedures. Funds didn't go out timely. We didn't follow conflict policies. We didn't properly document most facets: purchase contracts, rental contracts, rehabilitation contracts, invoices, change orders, blah, blah, blah. Each property that was audited was a nightmare. Everything had multiple problems, and they didn't audit everything. They just audited just the ones you saw. We've had so many other properties than that, so we don't know exactly the extent of our problems. We've lost tens of thousands of dollars because we had no idea how much the rehabs were going to cost. They ended up costing us, in some cases, more than the property purchase price was. We didn't make sure the work was done. We made payments before invoices. We had payments without invoices. You know, we're sitting on two vacant properties that we're having to fund the utilities on, the yard work, because we didn't have any policy or procedure or even idea what we were going to do with the properties. No checks and balances. So I know beyond a doubt that we can't ignore obvious problems anymore. And when someone says, I think that there's a problem here, then someone needs to say, let's investigate it, because I said it time and time and time again, And guess what? There was a big problem here. It's a fiasco. So those are my comments, and I am appreciative of what you guys have done.
I think Councilmember Bixel said it best. Let's just go forward. But you're being very humble and a little too modest, sir. You handed us a policies and procedures manual that was like this big, and that was a massive undertaking. And when you got back and came back as a PERS annuitant, you did it in about 30 days. A lot of people asked, why is the city bringing Gary Hampton back as a PERS annuitant? And I think we all know the answer to that question tonight. Your candidness and honesty is very well received and appreciated in this council, and we recognize the massive undertaking that you took on and got us straight with HUD. So thank you.
90% of the work is done by staff. I'm the director.
Get that.
And only because I've been here so long, I'm going to hit just a little hard on, more than 2 years ago, we had to sit here and be told that, surprise, surprise, you have to sign and date a check for housing. And I can't believe that was something that we had to be like, oh my gosh, you're kidding. And this was pertaining to our housing. I do agree with the Vice Mayor that I'm disappointed that we didn't actually look at what we knew was wrong. We took a different angle at it. So we got what we got, and we'll move on from now. But this is why we kept saying there's a problem, and why we shouldn't be in housing. All we've done is we haven't served the public, we haven't helped our seniors, and what we can actually show is that we bought high and sold low, and that's not how the people want us to treat their money. But with that, what is the will of council?
Motion to approve 11A.
Second.
I have a motion and a second. Will you call the roll, please?
Councilmember Abram?
Yes.
Councilmember Bixel?
Yes.
Vice Mayor Franco?
Yes.
Councilmember Moniz?
Yes.
Mayor Bublak?
Yes.
Mayor, could I just add one last comment?
Yes, sir.
So you should have been able to tell by my stammering through this report that this is a very difficult
Absolutely.
subject to deliver. It's not only embarrassing as a department director, but this doesn't really reflect on the departments, the rest of the departments. This city is sound. This city operates efficiently. We can turn a penny into 2 cents if that's what council asks us to do. And the sad part is when we have to report this level of failure, it gets applied to every department. And let me assure you, this is solely related to housing. And I think that if you flash back on the money that we received for COVID recovery, when we received millions of dollars and the government told us that we would get parameters for those expenditures within the next 12 to 16 months, and yet we needed to spend it immediately, that's what you deal with when you deal with federal funds.
True.
Here you go, have at it, and then 2 years later you receive all of the policies and procedures and the standards, and then you find you're not in compliance and they want you to return money. You're set up for failure from the beginning. I'm not saying that HUD set us up for failure, but what I'm saying is, as long as we comply with the HUD policies, when you talk to HUD about this, they say, well, those are details about how you run your city and your housing program.
Wow.
They're more than details. So, the main point that I want to stress is no one should be judging this scenario, applying it to the future housing, and certainly not applying it to any of the other departments that are here. The directors that you have are phenomenal. We don't have this problem throughout the city. This is an isolated issue and a very embarrassing isolated issue. So thank you for your time.
Well said. Thank you, Mr. Hampton. All right. Item B, Ms. Figueroa. You really want to come back up?
Good evening, Mayor and council members. The item before you is a recommendation to award the public service grants for fiscal year 24-25. The Notice of Funding Opportunity, or NOFO, went out, and the application was made available November 3rd, 2023. A technical assistant workshop was held on December 5th of 2023 with applications due December 14th of 2023. Presentations were given to the CDBG Selection Committee in January of 2024. 7 applications were received and the committee recommended funding. All 7 received. The following were the contracts recommended. We Care Emergency Shelter for $10,000. Recreation Department for the City of Turlock, Recreation Scholarships for $10,000. United Samaritans Emergency Food Box Program for $10,000. United Samaritans Senior Meals Program for $10,000. Center for Human Services Street Outreach and Navigation for $10,000. Haven for Housing Assistance for $10,000. And Project Sentinel for Fair Housing Services for $10,000, for a total of $70,000. So that concludes my presentation. I'm available for any questions.
Questions?
Yes. I realize again that you are new to our department, so again, welcome. And can you clarify how $70,000 became the number? The NOFA said $50,000. Everything's an even 10. What's the process that goes into that?
So I will need to look more into that. From the little bit of research I was able to do, I wasn't able to confirm how that number was come about. Again, the 10,000 seems to be a prior precedent that was set, and then awarding all 7, again, assuming that that was how that total came up.
Any other questions?
Yeah, okay. Again, going back to the 15% allowable, so technically, we could have had the 613 plus the 130, and then timesing that by 15. So we
Correct.
could have had 111,000 and some change
Correct.
that we gave out
That's correct.
to these grants. Without changing anything, we can do that, correct?
Correct. I would just caution you, because we, as I mentioned in the prior presentation, we were told by the head rep that those funds, they
Are
believe they're
going
going to go
down.
down. They couldn't
Right.
confirm with me a
Right.
percentage or how much that would be, so.
Okay, all right. But we do have funds in CBDG
Yes.
to work all that magic. Okay, thank you.
Other questions?
Yes, just follow up to that. So increasing these amounts per grant applicant, we would have needed to make that part of our annual action plan like 20 minutes ago?
Yes,
Because it's a kind of a stepwise thing, right?
Yes,
Okay.
yes.
Any other questions? Okay, let's open it to the public. Anyone wishing to speak on this item? Bob?
On the weed care, wanting to give them 4,500 because they service 45% of Turlock residents. Before we lock into that, should we not go to the other cities, such as Modesto, and find out what percentage of Turlock residents they're serving up there? I think you should just keep the 10,000 and quit looking at nickel and diming these guys. And they're the ones who actually gave you something to work with. What you're gonna do is incentivize them to not give you as much information. Thank you.
Anybody else? Okay, we'll close public comment and bring it back. Comments? Vice Mayor?
Yeah, I believe we already took care of the annual action plan revision for the We Care. And so I would move that we would reduce We Care to 4,500 instead of the 10,000.
Second.
We have a motion and a second. Will you call the roll, please?
Councilmember Abram?
I'd like an opportunity just to make a comment first that Vice Mayor Franco is on the CDBG committee, and I requested to see the applications too. And looking at each of these grant applicants, the vast majority have budgets that far exceed $10,000. And with having money that we could give to these groups who are serving seniors food, who are providing shelter for people who are fleeing domestic violence, who are trying to access our very own recreation for children and seniors, I find it very disappointing that we are sticking to our this is the way we've always done it. We've always given $10,000. So I would really appreciate if going forward we could change the timing of when we put out the NOFA, so the annual action plan comes first, and the CDBG committee is given full opportunity to fully fund the groups that are requesting these grants, because like I said, per our capers, which are our report cards for CDBG funds, this is where the action is happening. This is where our money is being put to use in the community, not with, unfortunately not with housing, just a smattering of people here and there. So I hope that when this comes around next year, which it will come around next year, that we can do something different. Yes.
I have a comment to go along with that. We can revise our annual action plan at some point. And so before the next NOFA for these CBDG public service programs, it might behoove us to look at that and amend the annual action plan so that we could up our service grants. Maybe I'm not sure when they come out.
It's been a lot more before.
When does the NOFA come out for the public service grants?
Around November.
Okay, so maybe we look at this in either mid-September or early October and revise the annual action plan so that we could give more out on the NOFA.
Okay.
And you called the vote?
Councilmember Abram?
No.
Councilmember Bixel?
No.
Vice Mayor Franco?
Yes.
Councilmember Moniz?
Yes.
Mayor Bublak?
Yes, it passes with the 3-2. Thank you for
Thank
your.
you.
All right, we're now on to the budget. Dun, dun, dun. It is. Do we have some?
Thank you, Honorable Mayor and council members. Tonight's presentation is for discussion primarily on the general fund and Measure A. We are only talking about the general component of Measure A today because when we have our next meeting, we'll be talking about all the other programs that go along with that program. So we'll talk about more appropriate to take it at that time. So we'll go ahead and walk through some of the information and have some discussion. So again, today we'll be talking about general fund, talk about revenue streams, expenditures, and how they're kind of flowing through Measure A as well. So for your general fund, you can see that primarily your overall revenue streams are coming in through tax formats. It's property tax, sales tax, things of that nature, which is pretty standard for a general fund and how the structure overall looks. Your next components are going to be from transfers or it's going to be from user fees and things of that nature. So to kind of give some highlights of what we're looking at for general fund revenues, again, taxes make up 71.44% of the overall revenues. Property tax is projected to increase about 6%, which is basically what we estimated for this fiscal year too as well, and we're pretty close to that mark. Sales tax is increasing by 2.3%. Again, that's taking our current amended budget, because we did come back at mid-year and amend it, and that's the accelerator that we have, utilizing the consultant that gives us that information. Interest. This one I will talk a little bit about because interest is a large factor we're seeing within this projected fiscal year and it going into the next one. So a projected increase of about $2 million from the current proposed budget. So what does that mean? So for interest as a whole, we take all the interest from all our investments, whether that be from camp, LAVE, treasury, or whatever investments the treasurer may be making, and we allocate those across multiple funds. So for the overall interest projected for next fiscal, just to kind of put it in full number to you, the interest we budgeted for this fiscal year coming into the budget cycle, a totality of all funds, 2.3. We're estimating about 7.5. So that gives you an overall understanding of what the market's looking like, what our investments are doing, and some of the changes that we've made to make sure we maximize those dollar amounts. The next one's going to be the allocation of $1 million from the Section 115 trust. This is a previous conversation that we had council with the overall reserve factor and what the policy is. This is, as part of that discussion, part of the current budget for $1 million, but I do want to have a conversation about what that all looks like. We do represent a positive gain, so having that $1 million has different factors and how it plays into it, but we can have a further conversation as there is some questions regarding how this is all going to work. Because there are different options that potentially we can do. One is looking more at getting a lump sum payment instead and removing that $1 million and allocating a different format, or some other faction, or we can look at other funding sources potentially to actually execute into a trust. The trust has not been established at this point, so there is still time. If council wants to give a little different direction on how to allocate that, it doesn't have to be allocated at this point, but we can all go through the overall revenue and how it looks. Is there any questions on that part?
When are you gonna bring that up? You wanna talk about it right now?
We could discuss it now, yeah.
Because when you're talking general fund, then that's kind of more Measure A that we did the allocation. Should we wait?
So Measure A general is part of this conversation.
Okay.
It's gonna be more in the conversation of the general fund. And the reason I say that is because that's really where it's assisting at that point. Because that money has all come through the general fund, hit all the expenditures, gone through, and created what our reserve was. So it's commingled, yes, with Measure A. Yes, Measure A was putting a good chunk of it to get us where we were, but there is other funds in there too as well. So.
Yeah, I wouldn't mind reconsidering it. I know that typically you have to, somebody who voted yes for it, and I know it was no, yes, yes, yes. So I would be interested in looking at reopening that conversation possibly.
Okay.
If
So-
somebody else.
I voted yes, and I will reopen.
Okay. So how do you want to do this then?
So we'll leave that set aside for the next
Okay,
meeting, and
perfect.
we'll have further discussion. And we'll have a full discussion on how it all looks.
Okay,
Okay?
thank you.
So sales tax. As you're well aware, we did receive a good overall increase in this fiscal year. Large part of that is due to economic development and the Amazon coming in. So you're seeing those numbers play through the year. This is a forecast that, again, was developed by our consultants and what that all looks like. So you do see increases going into the future years, primarily on average about 2.3 to 2.5 increases over year. So not large jumps. Prior you're seeing like 3. Obviously you saw that large spike. So I wouldn't say we're flattening out, but we are still seeing some increases going through the future years. Expenditures. So going through your expenditures for the general fund, it's always going to be salary benefits. It's always going to be a major component. That's why it's so beneficial that you really have to track your labor and how your UL and all those payments come through, because it is your biggest overall liability. So with labor, our salaries and benefits coming out to about 4.1. Some of the highlights are currently being proposed within the general fund budget. I propose new full-time employees to officers. This is actually unfreezing the current officers, not addition to, it's actually relieving that. One staff services assistant, proposed reclassifications, animal services officer to a senior position, senior planner to a principal planner, building inspector 1 to a reclassification inspection. A lot of this is really just pitting the individual where they currently are to their what their job duties and descriptions they're currently doing, and making more allocation of reclass. The proposed other operational requests is about $1.3 million. Measure A. And we'll get into the minute when we talk about the report. So sales tax again, obviously because if Amazon the way it works, we're not going to see that big spike in Measure A. Just have the way the overall allocation comes through. But we do see slight increases coming through the end. This one I do want to discuss. So Measure A policy. Currently, as the policy stands, you have a 10% allocation coming into the general fund. Great decision. It really helped the city overall come through and come strong and build a strong financial impact on where you currently are. But given that, it's done its purpose. It's now time to readdress what that looks like. So again, we just had the conversation on what your reserves are. We put it back to where it needs to be per policy at 22.5%. But this allocation, not just for going in the future, at least for next fiscal, but also for this fiscal. We don't necessarily need it because we have the reserve capacity we need. So it can either flow through and it's going to go back through the policy itself again, the reserve policy, or we can make directions on how that wants to be allocated today. So I do want to open that up for conversation.
All right, yeah, now, it's a good time, let's do it. You have the percentages of what we said with roads, public safety, and parks?
Correct. So the general is going to be the 50%. That's where there's parks and a lot of public safety and things of that nature get funded.
No, but I mean, I'm sorry, for Measure A specifically, we had allocated like 50% of it, money was gonna go to roads.
No, correct. So 50% of it goes to roads directly. That's the other road fund we set aside. 10% of it goes to this action here, and 40% goes to general services.
Okay, so an additional 5% to roads we're never gonna fix the roads in the next, I mean,
This is a good problem to have. I mean, congratulations to, everyone that we are in good standing with our reserve accounts. My biggest request from people is fix my roads, fix our roads, Golden State Boulevard. Please fix Golden State Boulevard gets it in my district most of the time. I would say at least 50% to roads.
well, we're already at 50, right? So we're taking that 10% and
Right,
allocating
and
it.
50% of that has to go back to roads. And then
So make it 55?
it's, as much as possible.
According to Measure A, there's only, a handful of things that are on there.
Correct.
Public safety, parks,
Correct.
which are homeless and
Police, fire, parks,
and roads.
roads, and homeless.
I have
Some
no
things.
objection to splitting this 5% and putting it 50, total fund 55% to roads. I would advocate for the other 5% to be really, targeted and mindful of the Section 115 trust and the UAL. I have heard the comments and I understand the concept that this ballot measure was sold to the public as it's for police and fire. But I would say that police and fire personnel have pensions just like everyone else, and the pension obligation is part of having staff. So I think that really needs to be part of this, seriously considered.
I'm always going to go back to Measure A wasn't meant for pensions. We have other means of paying down pensions, and when people voted for Measure A, they wanted it for roads, police, fire, etc. They did. Pensions were never in that
Pay them
resolution.
more was the words, but yeah.
I mean, can I just, while we're on the discussion of pensions, the other means to pay for that is the general fund, right? Every department has a line item that says, PERS UAL. So if we're not planning for where it's going to come from, that's not the general fund, then more of it's just going to get applied to the general fund, and less of it is going to, that pie that we have for the general fund, less of it can go toward the services and salaries and, everything else that people expect from our city. So Vice Mayor Franco, where do the other places that it comes from? Because it's the general fund, and we need to plan for a different path.
So I will say that in the past, I've developed other policies just around UAL and pension as a whole. And basically what I did is set a policy in the sense of the way that the general fund itself will set a budget of X amount of dollars. And this can potentially look at cannabis at X amount of dollars on an annual basis. Because we're trying to get funding streams, the general fund's really going to be the one to do it. You have to set those policies and what that funding sources look like. So you're using sales tax instead of this special measure could potentially be an example. You're not going to get $1 million in that sense of the way, but you can commingle to at least continue to develop and advise a plan financially to move forward and how to fund, whether it be a trust or a direct allocation and how it all looks. So if you can direct me to come back with a different policy and potential funding sources on how that all looks like.
I'm just a little confused. So you're saying that you Measure A, and I'm not trying to put words in your mouth, I'm just trying to understand. So you want Measure A to be both, to pay for salary, the vehicles, and their retirement, and then the rest of the employees, their salary and everything will come out of the whole general?
I mean, yes, and I mean, the kind of what I'm operating from is that, money is fungible, right? So sales tax is sales tax. And so Measure A money, while that percentage was asked of the voters for police and fire salaries, it all gets kind of mixed into the same pot. So I think that whether it's salary for current employees or their pensions for public safety and all the other employees that we've had before, I don't see a big difference. And maybe that's just a fundamental, philosophy difference here, but.
I know it's basically coming from one pocket or the other, and Measure A was a general fund measure. It wasn't specific, otherwise it wouldn't have passed. But when we came on and it was voted on, the public wanted certain things, and paying down PERS was not one of those items that the public said, these are the items we want. And yes, we'll give you the sales tax measure if you pay for these items. I would like to see it come from another source. And I know it's semantics. It's just one account or the other. They're both general fund accounts, and yes, we can do it. But I prefer to stay a little more pure and say, okay, Measure A was as written. The people wanted it for this. And I would like to stick with what the people voted for, what they were led to believe it was for, and paying down PERS just wasn't one of those things. So I would like to see that come from a different account.
And I wouldn't disagree. I think that it is not a special tax, but it was kind of sold like that to the public, and I'm not going to get in the middle of how to barter it, other than it was for primarily roads, public safety, and that meant to hire more and keep staffing. So if we take that portion out, then we're going to have less bodies because we're trying to take care of the PERS that keeps rising. We've always had to pay PERS down. We've always had to. I mean, that's what every city does. So I kind of think that the general fund makes more sense, and this way the public doesn't just come and take the Measure 8 away from us because we're kind of violating their thought processes.
I'd just like to add one more point to clarify that, I'm not suggesting that this potential 5% is always going to the UAL in perpetuity, as Director Moreno showed us, that there is a few years where there is a hump that our payments are going to be high, and I'm looking toward that 2032 or whatever it was when things will settle out. And I think that right now, where this 10% has not been going toward salaries for this whole time, it's been going toward building the reserve, that we still hold some of it back from funding salaries and use it to get us over that hump until the classic PERS obligations minimizes and the PEPRA obligations level things out. So I don't want it to sound like I'm totally in opposition with you. I understand, that's where I'm coming from, and that's what I want to see in the relatively midterm.
And I get it. The reason I actually wanted to revisit it is because I actually was kind of looking at that. But as I talk to people, they're like, "Hey, we'll just take Measure A away from you. You have no solid ground. We can revote it and get it out of here." And they're not wrong. So why stir the pot? Why not just take care of what we said we'd do and find another avenue to do that? And if that means that we just take this and put 5% into public safety, 5% of this 10 into roads, then we're keeping our word to the public on a normal tax, not a special tax.
Can I have a turn?
Please. I didn't know you were here. When did you show up?
I know, right? So, Isaac, I have the worst roads in the town, so I'm all about 55% for roads, but I am absolutely against using Measure A funds to pay down that UAL, and I will tell you why. For those of you that weren't here, the person that wrote the ordinance to put it on the ballot for Measure A, and he knows who he is, he wrote it as if it was a specific tax. They made it appear that way because it was the only way they could get it to pass. It's, in fact, as these guys have stated, it's a general tax. But the public passed Measure A because it was sold for police, fire, and roads. It wasn't sold to the public for police and fire's past due pension or the pension problem. We had frozen positions in police and fire at that time, and they wanted those positions unfrozen. That's what drove the public to say, okay, yeah, it's for police and fire, not the UAL business. And I think we're doing the public a disservice. It's not the perception. Perception is reality for people. And the public's perception was Measure A was going to be for this, not that. It's not semantics. It's not, oh, this account or that account. This is the way it was sold to the public. And the UAL is not what was sold to the public.
So we can't vote on this right now. You have a direction. You got what we're
I have
going.
direction. It is a formal policy. I'll bring the
Yeah.
policy back meeting and we can have that formalized and you can go through to finalize the discussion and adopt
Outstanding.
it.
I think you got enough out of that, right?
I did. Thank you. So that concludes my overall presentation. It was the one I did. So we're gonna go through every single page. No.
Right.
So we're just gonna go through
That's
a brief
nice, yeah.
overview, right? Because nothing in here is pretty straightforward. The way I propose and go through a budget, basically, the augmentations are what's new, right? The budget is basically status quo. You're gonna have accelerators. You obviously gotta deal with your increases in labor that come forward, whatever that may be, but the augmentations are really where the story's at. What are the departments doing with these funds or these additional funds over and above that they're requesting, okay? So going through the report, at a quick view, you know me, I go pretty fast, so stop me if you have any questions. We'll start with the first page, the very first page that's identified within the book, and it's the general fund summary page. So you can see that we do have revenues that are exceeding expenditures, but that does take into a factor that $1 million, so obviously we're gonna be talking about that again, and we'll see where that goes. But still, even if that is removed or not removed, you still would reflect a positive gain within the general fund, which is good. The sales tax has really picked up, because when we had the conversation about the reserves, we're really talking about how that big number was gonna float up and really had to address us. So interest is coming in good, has really picked some of that stuff up. So within the first pages after that, you're really just going through all the primary revenues within the city. So the primary cities are gonna be, our revenues are obviously we need taxes and things of nature, but we've already talked about that. So unless there's any questions about revenues, we'll move on to.
I do have a comment.
Sure.
Question,
Sure.
comment.
Questions.
Okay. Can we, for each of the revenue accounts, general fund revenue accounts, get one of these like you've given to me on the ARPA augmentation? So what this did was it gave us the amount that we got, and then everything we committed, and then it gives each year what the actuals were if they were actuals, and then what the budget was if it was a budget item, not spent yet.
So you want it for
I
every
want it for
department?
all of the revenue accounts, because in order to say, yes, we want to do these augmentations, we need to know what our balance forward was and what we've committed, because I'm not comfortable in committing unless I know for sure that we've got money in the bank in the years that we need it. And this, gave me all of the information that I needed. Yes, we do have $1.277 million left to commit for our ARPA. And that to me was such a valuable tool that I think that everyone would benefit from that kind of tool on each of the revenue accounts. Not all of the accounts, just the revenue accounts, to show here's what you've got committed, here's what you've spent, and here's your balance. So I'd like to see that for just the revenue accounts.
Sure, I can see what I could work up. I mean, the general fund works a little different in the sense of the way where other revenue streams, let's say gas tax, right? It's going to come in and sit special for specific projects. It goes in the reserves. You don't set a policy around the reserve for that because you're supposed to be spending it. So you know exactly what your future forecasts and things of that nature are. So we can forecast out the revenues and kind of give you a projection of what's committed.
Cash flow.
Exactly.
I mean, if I don't use it in my business, I don't know what I've got committed. So how can I go out there and say, yes, I'm going to give more raises, or I'm going to go buy a new fire truck, or I'm going to do this or that or the other thing, unless I know exactly what I've got committed, and what I have left.
Sure.
That's
what I can do is
what I'm
actually present and develop a forecast for you, a 5-year lookout.
Perfect.
And you can see what those revenue streams are going to look like in the future. as
That
a
would be
projection.
including like cannabis, transient occupancy, all of the
Correct.
all of the revenue accounts.
Sure, I can build that for you. Okay. So for the augmentation list, you can see the ones that the report has proposed for funding and the ones that are not. Primarily what occurred is some staffing was picked up, but the bulk of it was just services and standard operational things to kind of move the city forward as far as what the overall looks like. Trying to hold back, again, our biggest really financial outcome right now, or forecast that needs to be looked at, is negotiations. When you're negotiating for the whole city, you're really not, your budget looks different. That's why you have a positive gain. Traditionally, what I'd bring to you is a balanced budget and we move forward on what those proposals and augmentations look like. Obviously, staff would like to pick up more, right? That's why they build these augmentation forms, but we really have to be mindful for the negotiation factor too as well. So moving through, you see the next department, it's going to be on page 18 of the budget book itself. This is just going to be the city council budget overall, pretty straightforward, no augmentations are requested. They're pretty standard and flat. Next will be the city manager's budget. Again, there is some changes. This one thing we'd like to see is we broke out economic development. We really want to be able to see what those contracts and what those services are that we're putting out to the public to make sure we maximize the retained. So we carved out from the city manager's budget and created a whole nother budget section just for that department. So for the city manager's department, one augmentation for 1,100, not very substantial. And the next page, we'll go to page 23 of the budget book. That is the new department that we just discussed, economic development. So you do have your director in there, it's the special services and things they need to manage. So there's no augmentations only because it's almost pretty much status quo. It just carved out from the original budget that it had before. There was some small ones though. And that would be a part-time help and office furniture to be able to assist with that department. Moving on, you have the city clerk. So for this department and for the city attorney, you took some action tonight on a new FTE, a new full-time employee. This budget does not represent that. Obviously, I need action before I can do so. So when we bring back the general fund budget, you will see that change in here. But from the fiscal impact, it was very minimal. We had a lot of part-time that wasn't being used. To maximize those dollars, it's more beneficial to bring on a full-time employee to assist. The primary dollar amount actually augmentation within that department is really just for the elections. Finance department is pretty much status quo. There's no approved or proposed augmentations.
Thank you for that.
Very nicely done.
Yeah, I usually have to cut myself, so it's just the way it goes. City attorney, again, most of it's pretty status quo. The bulk of it's really going to be some changes with the FTE that's going to be there now. So some small contract stuff, nothing major. Payroll department. Status quo, so no augmentations. Again, I won't bore you with all the details. So there are some slight increases, but the list really gives you a full general idea of the money that's coming in and out. Homeless response. This division or department, if you want to call it, is really just kind of a placeholder. If there is things that come up as far as a homeless response and we need to respond, we really want to have some kind of budgeted dollar amount so that we can do so. If we don't budget anything, then we're scrambling trying to figure out where to pull the money from if something does occur. Whether that's sheltering or whatever that may be, it's really just a placeholder for our current budget to be able to move forward. And that amount hasn't changed. That's the same amount that we currently have in our budget. The next department or division, we're talking about police, page 46 on my budget book. This is Fund 116. It's Special Public Services. This is Proposition 172, sales tax measure that comes in, as well as business license revenues, and it gets split up between police and fire. It's pretty status quo overall. The expenditures you see in here are usually the same. I did ask at this point, though, to start using some of this money because there is a fund balance that should be utilized. So you do see some augmentations for them trying to get that money spent down. It's one of those funds where you don't really want an overall. You want them to be used in it for the equipment they need so they can do the service that they need to do overall. Fire two. So onto page 52 of the budget book. Now we start to see the cannabis factor. The cannabis factor is one type of conversation that council can have if they'd like to discuss. because there is a large proposed gain. So coming out of this fiscal year, I projected to be about $40,000 to $50,000 left potential revenue within the reserves. There is no direct allocation of big expenditures. Calamity Appeals is the one that kind of pulled out all together, so those funds are depleted, but we're showing a large gain within this coming fiscal year because there is no direct allocations. So if there is a funding source or something council would like to do, you can definitely look to this fund to do so.
Can I just ask on that, I think it's the next item, the recommendations of the ad hoc cannabis committee are gonna be coming up, and there's potentially a lot of staff work and things to do, in that space. Would you recommend this funding fixing cannabis?
I do. It can help with the business size services. So there is a section that says cannabis business expenses. Potentially you can pick that up. Depending on how that action goes, yeah, we could either look to this place or somewhere else to pick up some services that we need to be able to get that potential executed. I agree. All right, on to page 55, which is Measure A. Measure A itself, the 10% is still here. Obviously, we still have to change our policy, so that is a factor that we'll bring back and have for the discussion. But there is no transfers out to the general fund or any other factor. It can be completely utilized by the labor that's currently allocated there, so nothing has been added to it. I will say that I did remove one item, and that was just the general plan. There was $250,000 that was being allocated every year. It's built up about $750 so far. So I just like to pull back at this point so they can start to utilize those funds.
You know that a general plan is probably
$1 million, I know.
more than that now.
Yeah, so once they start having that conversation and because it takes multiple years to build that plan.
Right. It's gonna be a couple million by the time we're
Right.
there.
Really?
Yeah.
So,
I'd be a
okay.
little worried.
So I'll turn around and look at this again and see if we can pull this off or look for another funding source, maybe cannabis. So it says, I'll come back with a proposed plan. Okay.
Weed equals growth. Weed equals growth. Maybe not.
The next page that I'm looking at would be Fund 119. This is page 67 of the budget book. This is our ARPA funds. Okay, so the only things that are currently allocated, there's no formal request. Those are always brought to council for approval. These are things that have been obligated prior by council. So, and Councilmember Franco has that spreadsheet, and I could share that spreadsheet with everybody so you have it. Yeah.
Can we tell you our wishes for the one, or I think you said in the staff report it was $2.1 million.
That's correct.
For items to come forward and to build into the budget. Like I said before, I would like to see some of our fire infrastructure, capital improvement plan, and maybe, land acquisition for a new fire department that we eventually will need to be part of that. And regarding ARPA and the Treasury 2023 interim final rule, there was some, not discussion, there's a whole list that they say you can use ARPA funds for Title I CDBG activities. And so I would like to see if there are some CDBG projects. I know the mayor brought up, I think it was about a month ago, something about a micro business enterprise utilizing CDBG funds. I've asked many times for us to talk about what we can do with ARPA, because even though December 31st, 2024 seems like a long ways away, it's not in this world, I feel like. So CDBG or then other, direct small business kind of economic development initiatives, because that was an area that was really disproportionately impacted. Small businesses could not weather COVID the same way that an Amazon or, Target could. So
you're correct. There's 2.1 that's remaining. Whether we have that conversation today, but we're going to have it sooner or later because we do have to have it obligated by December 31st of 24. So at some point, yes, we do not have to have a final conversation on what the remaining funds look like. So I'll wait for council's direction on how that all wants to, whether I bring it separate, discuss it now, if that's the will of the body, or how we want to place it. But we're going to have that conversation at some point to what that looks like. So maybe we'll bring it back at a later point. That's fine. but we are having, we
Probably
will have
after
to
the
have.
budget, let's get the budget through first, and then right after that, we have nothing going on, right?
I'll keep you busy, don't worry.
Okay. Yeah, right.
All right, so that's ARPA. Moving on, you see again, we go back to the general fund, which is on page 70. This is other police departments and divisions. Again, your augmentations are in the packet. There are some augmentations overall. The big ones are already highlighted within the presentation. Same thing, going on to page 88. This is the police department, still general fund, but animal services. Again, the biggest augmentation was already discussed within the presentation. There are some small other requests to go along with those, but nothing of substantial financial impact. Next, we move on to fire, which is on page 92. There was quite a few augmentations within the packet overall with different services that are being proposed that are coming into the next budget cycle, and how they're going to propose getting those things done as far as funding equipment and things of that nature for different programs.
Can I talk on that one?
Yeah.
I know we talked earlier, previous meeting about ALS, and I said, what's this look like for a cost analysis, not cost prohibitive. I feel like we're kind of piecemealing this. We don't have a program yet. We should see the whole picture, and then we'll understand the allocation. If we just do this, well, we haven't even approved the thing. I'm sure we will, but I think it should be complete. And so I don't think we should just like, okay, let's just put a box with drugs in it and we'll figure it out later. I think it should be a whole program for us.
Okay, Chief, do you want to speak to that as far as when the proposed plan may be coming?
Yeah, we can get, if the desire is for a ALS program, which we are very working towards, we can get an estimated cost for that and present that at one time as opposed to piecemealing that together.
So your intent with the ALS box for the meds, what was that in this thing tonight? I'm trying to figure the picture out and help me understand.
So it's a secure place where we can
Understood.
Leave medications. The intent was there to move that along as we have money, as opposed to take a bigger bite. But if the desire is to take the entire bite at one time, then we can present it that way, if that's the desire.
See what the will was.
I think we're kind of getting the cart before the horse a little bit, Chief. We don't have an ALS program yet, and I think the council needs to vote on whether or not we're going to have an ALS program before we start implementing supplies and materials and such as places. That raised my eyebrows too. I'm not saying I'm against it. I'm certainly not, but I think we're just a little bit out of order, if you will.
Okay. The box may cost a little bit more next year, and so that would be the difference.
Councilmember Bixel said, what won't? And our finance director says, everything.
Inflation.
It's always going to go up. So given the current topic, we can really look at this part, talk to chief, see if something can come forward in the short term. If not, maybe potentially address it at a later date.
Yeah, there you go.
So, yes, because it is a decent dollar amount, although it's not hundreds and hundreds of thousands of dollars. It's still, I understand. You want to see a proposal, what that all looks like in the program. So we can come back at a later date and just discuss the funding sources for that too as well at a later point. So we will take care of that. Moving on to page 105 of the budget book. This is Development Services Engineering. So the engineering department, as you're well aware, is now moved into the general fund as well as the building department. So we are meeting in compliance with our prior findings for the audit. So that's a good thing. We took care of the debt structure that was there. And so we're moving forward with that. And we're impacting the general fund, but we'll still sustain it. So there are some augmentations, just like some of the other ones, really coming down to training, which is always a big thing for most departments. Going into the general fund parks, which is on page 13, you'll see the information coming through as far as CFD number 2, there are transfers in to help maintain the overall fund itself and assist for the services they're providing. There are some small augmentations too as well. Again, mostly about training. Going on to page 120 of the general fund, or the book, it's the general fund again, recreation. A lot of these, you're gonna see a lot of line items going through the book. It's really a lot of their programs. The directors and the departments really took a hard look at this program and how they do their budget book and started consolidating programs. So if it's aquatics, put everything in aquatics together. If it's dance classes or whatever it may be, pull that stuff together. It's kids programs, pull it all together. Pulling a budget apart like this doesn't help. It really doesn't. The accounting system will give you all the information you need. You don't need to have 20,000 line items to be able to do a budget. So,
Amen.
Are we in church?
this is my church, right?
All right, the financial church.
And as you can see, we're still going.
I see that. Look at all those trees you've ruined.
That's the 20,000 line items.
So moving forward onto page 136, which is Fund 120. This is our tourism fund. Pretty much status quo. We do have our TOT coming in here and some different items as far as revenues. There is some small points of labor and a lot of really just economic development programs that are coming in. Pretty much status quo. There is a small augmentation, but nothing major overall coming through for that program, that fund. The next one going on to sports facilities. That starts at page 139 of my budget book. That's the regional sports complex. The biggest thing to highlight here is really this is funded by general fund dollars. So what comes in has to be able to balance and create the program itself on how we take care of our sports complex and parks. So that's the primary functionality. And again, some more training for the request. Development service would be next. There is augmentations, but that was covered in the budget presentation. The next one on page 149 would be the building department. Again, they're now pulling everybody in to where they should be. Small augmentations, nothing that stands out.
Real quick, Mr. Moreno.
Yes.
We have the expenditure to cover down the engineering deficit that we had. How are we doing on that?
We don't need it anymore. So when we did the full, I don't want to call it reorg, but we merged those funds into the overall general fund. What we did is we merged the overall reserves. The building department was heavy, engineering was upside down. By merging the two, we were able to offset that obligation, so there was no outstanding liability for that department. And so we were able to bring it in clean and take care of that.
Awesome.
And again, that was one of our findings. So I'm happy to see it cleaned up. The last one that we have here is going to be Fund 501. This is IT. There are some requests for part-time hours as well as reclassifications, but those were covered in the budget presentation. And I believe that's it.
Was that a new computer that was coming up right here on the thing? Yeah. Okay.
So I know it's a lot of information that we go through. It's a lot of detail. A big thanks to all the directors and their departments that work with me to get this done. This is not just done by finance. We get together, we meet for hours and try and get this done to come to a really not just healthy budget overall, but a manageable budget so that we're not coming back and ask for more money basically overall. So that concludes my presentation unless you have any questions.
Yeah, I guess question, comment, or if that's what we're able to do right now. I did not see in any of the general fund augmentations, whether they were funded or not, anything about, that the idea of an asset management firm. And I wanted to bring up the point again because I think I wrote your numbers down correctly, that our interest for the current fiscal year was 2.3 million, and next year it's projected to be 7.5 million. Correct?
That was our budgetary number in totality.
Yeah.
But we are being closer to that new number that we're projecting for next year. So yeah.
And a lot of that change happened because of, you said, camp and, increased higher yield money markets and things like that. And so spending money on an asset management firm is money to spend, to help the taxpayer money work harder. And, I think it would be a great benefit to this council to be able to have a consultant, a professional to call upon and say, can you please tell us that our asset allocation is optimized right now, and we can get a little bit more analysis, and it can help serve the duties of the treasurer, whether, whomever that may be at any given point. So I seeing that great change in, 2 point something million
Like
in
2.2.
projected growth, I think we can, that number can definitely pay for an asset management firm, because I spoke to Director Moreno about this previously, and it's something that costs in the neighborhood of 7 basis points. So it's like, that's 7/100ths of what the total assets under management would be.
I do agree that an asset firm will be beneficial to the overall city. The primary reason is our fund is getting larger, and it takes a lot, but we do have the treasurer. I
At
can
$500 a month.
So I can't discuss the matter of the treasurer, but the treasurer has full investment authority via the policy. So if she wants to make the change to do so, I can approach her with it. But I know I have approached her in the past, and she was fine with doing the transactions and how we're currently doing so. But I can approach it again with her, and if she's willing, we could have a conversation at that point in time. But the investment policy does dictate that she has the full authority on how we do our investment program.
And be that as it may, we have the budgetary, side of things, right? So we can go out for RFP and ask for this type of, this consultant, correct? Because as this elected body, we are delegating our power of, overseeing the investment to another elected official. Legal analysis here.
Yeah.
I'll have to check the government code, but I think there are some specified things there for the treasurer, an elected treasurer.
Yeah, so myself and city attorney can go through the policies currently adopted, look at our ordinance and who has full authority and what that looks like. And I can report that back to the council on what we can and cannot do as far as the overall. I will say the investment policy is a policy, right? It's adopted by council. So that's one thing, but we need to go into the full extent of the ordinance and the authority of the treasurer and what that looks like. Okay?
Awesome, thank you. Any other comments and comments? I'm still asking for comments. Did you say comments?
Give some comments.
Let's do it.
I think we can all see that the budget's pretty tight. Looking at it, we're balanced, so this is a good thing, but we're only over by 1.5 million. Augmentations are, over the $2 million range plus. So obviously we couldn't do all of them. You've got a lot of augmentations here. 2.43 plus another 1.375 that were proposed but not recommended for funding. Maybe I'm going to suggest that we postpone the augmentation discussion until after Q1 so we can kind of see how our budget's progressing. I don't see any problems with the budget as it is, but we obviously can't fund all of the augmentations, and so we're going to have a discussion about picking and choosing, and someone's going to not get what they want. Plus, we've got labor negotiations coming, so we also have to consider that with that 1.5 million. So my suggestion on the augmentations would be to wait until after Q1, and then we can see how our revenues are coming in. And my suggestion too is going to be what the mayor and I have discussed, and her suggestion is that we have a resolution that if the council doesn't pass a budget by the time the year end comes, that the start of the new year would go as status quo. So we would not have any freakouts, basically, because we didn't have a budget passed. If it didn't pass, we go on as the status quo until such time as we pass the budget. Maybe, Mayor, you can elaborate more on that, because that was your idea. I
So
thought that
there's
was a
different
great
formats
idea.
in which you can do what you're referring to. You can pass it a resolution that kind of just pushes you through until you want to formally come back and adopt it, or you, just as you stated, just carve out all the augmentations and say status quo, and make sure that that's what it is, and we roll forward. Because again, the way I build the budget really is based off the augmentations and status quo in a sense of the way.
Right.
So that can occur, yes. in
Yeah,
two
I just
different
want to
formats.
make sure that no one feels like, gosh, no one's going to get paid if we don't pass the budget.
No, that definitely
So
will
I
not
want to
occur.
make sure that we have something in resolution form that says if we don't pass the budget, it continues as is until such time as the new budget's passed. So, those are my comments.
Okay.
Other comments? You have direction, right?
Sounds like it. I'm good. All right, I'll bring back the requests that have been made, and we'll bring forward the rest of the funds for discussion. Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Mr. Wilson. You're up, sir.
Mayor, members of the council. This is a motion seeking city council acceptance of the final report of the Cannabis Ad Hoc Committee and direction to staff on follow-up actions desired by the city council. I would note that council member Abram chaired this committee, and she did a good job. Councilmember Bixel was a member. We also had 2 members of the planning commission, which was Matthew Davis and Jim Reap. We presented the initial report to the council on August 8th, 2023. We held our final meeting on October 26, 2023, and the attached is the final report from the committee. Based on the report, we are recommending that we formally end the city's pilot program and return to the council with an ordinance changes reflecting the end of the pilot program. In addition, no further action will be taken on allowing new types of cannabis businesses to operate in Turlock, and the retail license cap will remain at 4, and no non-retail business license cap will be pursued. Those are the overall recommendations that the committee had up. For one, there were 2 issues that were left outstanding, and one of them was zoning and clarification of youth facility. This committee believed that the zoning requirements that were in place didn't need any revision, but they determined that the 600-foot buffer around sensitive uses be maintained. Since youth facility is not a term defined in the law, the committee did recommend that the city further consider this issue to determine, excuse me, how the buffer around such facilities will be defined and applied. And we'll come back to that issue when we present to you an ordinance and try to deal with that in the ordinance. And last but not least, the final recommendation by the committee is for the city to pursue a cannabis business license tax and put that on November 2024 ballot. If the tax were to pass, the committee recommends the city then consider alternatives to development agreements and possible extensions of any reaching their 5-year term which stay in place in the interim. Consequently, staff will allow council direction whether to pursue a cannabis business license tax for November ballot. And that's the report from the committee.
I'll let the chair start. If you, go ahead and add on to that.
Okay.
We'll give you free time.
Yes, free time. Yes, I think Mr. Wilson covered all of the different points there. I wanted to thank the public who was a part of coming to these meetings. We had a collection of the business proprietors and also interested parties in the public, and all the staff, in development services, and Director Moreno and our city attorney and Mr. Wilson, everybody who was helpful in guiding all of this process. It was an interesting exercise with our committee as a whole, because I will say, and my colleague here can maybe give us his thoughts, but I feel like the general tenor of the committee was to not regulate in this space over unnecessarily. One of our committee members, I wrote down his quote too, that he was not interested in regulating cannabis more than alcohol is regulated. And so I thought that was an interesting thing I wanted to bring up to all of you. These are not his words, but my kind of assessment that, with this cannabis being a relatively newer market and one that still has, unfortunately, a very active illegal market, that jurisdictions such as ours have a very fine line to walk between not, over-regulating, which then makes it harder for legal enterprise and drives people to the illegal enterprise. So with that, we tried to create a concise list for you to consider. The newest items being really no substantial change to zoning with the youth centers. The consultants that the committee used recommended, and I support that we should remove some administrative ambiguity. So right now it says youth center, and that means, I have it here, any public or private facility that is primarily used to host recreational or social activities for minors. But is that a dance studio? Is that a karate class? So, I want our ordinance to be structured in a way that makes it so staff doesn't have to make a case-by-case judgment call. We can be a little bit more clear on, this is what it's not, this is what we think it should be. And then, yes, the tax seems to be the most appropriate way for things to be going. And, to reduce some administrative burden, it is the recommendation of the committee to move toward a special business permit rather than the development agreement and CUP, because each of those components has its own problems in there. So I'm happy to help field any questions, but I'm not the expert. I just have spent too much time reading about this.
Vice Mayor?
I have a question. What are some of the other what are neighboring cities doing? Are they moving towards tax? Are they, I'm not up to snuff on this, so what is everybody else doing?
I'm going to let City Manager talk to that first.
Other jurisdictions seem to be moving towards a tax as opposed to development agreements. From an administration perspective, the tax is much easier to administer. From a staff time perspective, it's a heck of a lot less staff time once you get a tax in place, so you aren't doing development agreements and that kind of stuff.
So do you think that with a tax rather than the DAs, we would have approximately the same revenue stream, more, less?
I'm predicting.
Mr. Moreno, up, down?
I'm predicting it'll be about the same.
And Director Moreno is gonna say?
Survey says?
So I agree. We can make the base number what we need it to be to kind of get it to where we need to be. Because some of the locations are paying base dollar amounts. If you switch to a tax, they're going to pay what that tax is, so that number will change. So I have done some analysis, and it's really just looking at what that number is to come back to what that overall is. But to answer your question, we can come back to where we currently are. Yes.
Although I think we got a bump after 420. There were
Yeah.
lines everywhere.
No, it was free. It's free weed.
Mr. Moreno, I'd like to field another question to you regarding the tax. There's not a lot of time, right? So can you just give us how that is going to play out hereafter if this is the will of council?
You mean to get it on the ballot?
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
because the cutoff is coming, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, so the overall cutoff to get everything to the county is June 23rd. So I've gotten everything structured to this point, but I haven't executed any contracts to move forward without direction from council to update the ordinance, change the tax, and things of that nature. So staff and management are ready to go and get that done. It does take public hearings to get that done, so we do have a tight window, but I think we can move forward if there is direction tonight to get that done. We'll just have to march forward.
Other questions for the chair or the city manager, finance? Okay, let's open it to the public. Anyone wishing to speak regarding this item? Come on up.
So, I just have a couple of things about the 5%. Is that okay if I speak on that?
About marijuana, right?
No.
Oh.
The 5% in the 10% left.
Oh, she's on
Okay.
budget.
Okay.
Can I just say something
How
about
about-
that or no?
Can you put it, there's a card in the back, I think it should be golden. Can you write that question? We'll send you that answer. And we'll put it online as well. Sorry about that. This is just specific to marijuana.
No, it's okay.
That's okay. Anybody else? All right, we'll close the public comment. any more dialogue about this? I think we all know where I stand.
Yeah, we're gonna ignore you.
Alone.
Okay, so then you just need to have direction. Well, number one, we need to accept the report, correct?
Correct.
Okay, so move to approve the report,
Second?
Okay. 1 second, I don't.
and
wanna
then
leave out your
after
colleague.
that, we need to give staff direction for moving this towards a ballot measure.
Well, I think it's all
Why
part
don't
of,
you vote
it's all
to-
part of this.
We
Why don't you
can't
do-
vote on it, but we can.
But no,
we-
why don't you vote to accept,
Okay, accept the
handle that motion?
But it's
and then-
that, if you read the motion, sir,
Yeah,
it
okay.
says, and direction to staff on follow-up. So the motion is all encompassing.
Well,
We're gonna split
that's-
it. We're
agendas
gonna
are
split it.
approximate.
My motion is to accept the
Yeah.
report and
I'm
then
knowing
later
you. Go ahead.
discuss the direction for staff.
Okay, we have a motion and a second.
Wait,
That was
later
my,
discuss like today? 'Cause
Right now.
We're up against the June 24th.
right after
All right,
this.
fine.
Okay,
Go.
will you call the roll, please?
I'm sorry, who was the second?
I believe it was,
Oh,
yeah.
One of the-
I thought it was Cassandra, but okay.
Councilmember Abram?
Yes.
Councilmember Bixel?
Yes.
Vice Mayor Franco?
Yes.
Councilmember Moniz?
Yes.
Mayor Bublak?
No, it passes 4-1. Yeah,
So I think you can do it by motion or not. We just need a sense. Really, the question is, do you want staff to come back with the tax? With everything ready to put on the ballot?
So I will make the motion that we give staff direction to do what it needs to do to get this the sales tax measure put on the ballot.
you have a motion?
And a second.
We have a second. Call the roll, please.
Councilmember Abram?
Yes.
Councilmember Bixel?
Yes.
Vice Mayor Franco?
Yes.
Councilmember Moniz?
Yes.
Mayor Bublak?
No, it passes 4-1. Thank you, and thank you guys for serving on the committee. All right, next up is George.
Thank you, Mayor. As you will recall, the council passed a new chapter to the Municipal Code 19 about conflicts of interest and legal compliance documentation. And so we split it up like we did the insurance item before to allow some flexibility. So the ordinance you passed established the framework, and it said by resolution, you will establish these documentation requirements in two broad areas: legal compliance of entities that do, we did sort of expand it to kind of do business with the city. It started as kind of focused on grant applications, but it is written in a very broad manner to cover grants and permits and contracts and other approvals by the city. So we can kind of do all of that or some of that. And then also in the conflict of interest area, what's happened there with the new Levine Act that I probably should give a briefing on at a council meeting coming up, because it basically took campaign contributions, which had never created economic conflicts of interest. Now those are defined as economic conflicts of interest, financial conflicts of interest that you would have to step down on. So what some jurisdictions have done is they sort of focused on the Levine Act, and if you're applying for a land use application, you fill out a form that focuses on campaign contributions. But as staff thought it through, really, there's the kind of greater issue of just, kind of ordinary conflicts of interest. So this would create a little bit of a burden to applicants for things to basically let us know not only about campaign contributions, but also basically, do they have any other sorts of potential conflicts with either elected officials or appointed officials that are acting on their matter? So, that's how it's structured. So what the resolution does, and it's in the format because resolutions, I've noticed in my little over 3 years here, sometimes when the council takes action by resolution that it's of broad interest, it kind of gets lost and you have to dig it out and it's hard for the public to find. So this is in the format of the council policies that we started. And so it'd be the second one you acted on after we did that first one quite a while ago now. So that's how it's formatted. So those will be on the website and easily accessible to the public if they have questions about it. So what this does, what the resolution does, it creates, basically three categories. And these were both council direction and maybe a little bit arbitrary. I created a new category. I called it de minimis, and I said for $1,000 or less, because, I didn't want to get in a situation where, I don't know what kind of small permits we have that aren't, of really any economic value, that those don't have to comply with these rules, right? So that's a de minimis. Then a the small category includes things between $1,000 and $10,000, and then over $10,000, we called them large grants, permits, contracts, or other approvals. So the large category has the things we discussed with council. I think I've captured them all. If you're coming from a different program, from a state or federal program, you have to comply with those requirements always, right? And you heard a little bit about that from the interim director on the housing audit. But for independent large approvals, the large list is the thing to look at, where I think I tried to capture the council's action. Now, I was either creative, or others might say I cheated a little bit on the small category, because we had that discussion, you'll recall, about where the threshold was and then what the threshold would be for the small category. So instead of listing those in the resolution, because I think those might kind of change a little bit based on the experience we actually have and how big a burden it is, you'll see in there, I said that I've created this self-certification form where they tell us, they don't have certain things wrong with them. And then in the small category, I added any documentary requirements listed in that self-certification form. So that's where we'll put in kind of the minimal items we discussed at the council meetings. But I did it that way so we could sort of just adjust it up or down, as we have real world experience and we're getting a sense from applicants of whether, we're creating a problem and creating a disincentive for that. So that's how it's structured. And I'm happy to answer any questions about it.
So, Mr. Petrolakis, in regard to the form that they self-attest to their understanding, is there under penalty of perjury? I mean, because if there's no reason for them to tell the truth and us not to figure it out, then why do all this?
I intended that it would be. I think that's,
Okay.
that would be normal for such a thing, I think.
Questions?
Yes, I have a question. Mr. Petrolakis, in creating all of this, I know that you had to do a lot of surveying of what are the different grants and what are the different departments doing. And, we've had lots of discussions on where the line is drawn, but in your opinion, is $10,000 large for what we, as the city, are doing? And is that the most appropriate threshold?
As any good city attorney, my opinion is the council's opinion, but on something like that. But as I drafted it, I will say it occurred to me that maybe that could be a little higher. It just felt like that it was going to be a burden. So I didn't. A 20,000 came to mind. So you're asking my opinion. That's as I was working with it, that felt better to me. Because I do think, the large list it's a long list, it's a lot of stuff. So, there is going to be sort of an inadvertent disincentive there somewhere in there. So if you want to think about that, I'm fine with anything like that.
20 is more reasonable.
And I would just sort of ask in a general sense that, here we're talking about making sure that all the T's are crossed and the I's are dotted on the front end and the application and the grant recipient side of things. But we do have all of the 300 pages of policies and procedures and everything. There are checks on the back end too, right? So all of that should still be continuing as intended.
Yes, yes. If I'm understanding the question correctly, the one thing I noticed when I was doing it is that And it'll have to be kind of in the checklist we do in the forms maybe. And because as I'm sitting here, I don't remember if I captured it in here or not. I realize some things we're asking for, like if somebody doesn't do business in the city yet, like they're a charity and they don't have it, and we require a business license for most things we do. Well, that's really not an application thing. That's if they get the grant thing, right? So they're a little bit different, right? And so I think that will be addressed as the city attorney's office develops these forms, I guess, because, I'm not going to inflict this one on anybody else. And the goal is to have as few of these as possible and make them hopefully generally applicable across departments and things, so it's not, doesn't become
So did
more
E-staff
bureaucracy.
look at it?
What's that?
Did E-staff look at it? Did the directors look at it?
They didn't see this. They saw the previous stuff when we discussed it at council. But that would have been a good idea, probably.
Other questions? All right, open it to public. Anyone wishing to speak on this item? Okay, we'll close public comment, bring it back for dialogue.
I would be in support of raising the threshold, as I heard some nodding heads over there, and
Heard the heads.
just being funny. And then on Mr. Petrolak is on page 2 of 5 of the document. Under the general provisions of the self-certification form, I would request that there be some further clarity on the point where it says the role of the CEO/president and the CFO/treasurer are not the same, because we have very much had applicants for grants that are small businesses where they don't have a whole C-suite. And so if we can maybe kind of fine tune on what type of entities that would be most appropriate, I think that. I know we're trying to cover a broad blanket here, but I don't think that applies, and I don't want to have any part of this to be prohibiting people from being able to apply for grants.
Yeah, that's a good point, because I think that was, I think the discussion was more about nonprofits. So I think in the documentary part of it, I called out things that were only for nonprofits. So that would be one way. I'll ask anybody in the room to help with this. I don't know if because with the small nonprofit, I don't know if those two roles are ever mixed. I think they can't be, right? Mostly
There's a new corporations code that updated January 1, and it dictates the minimum amount of officers that you must have now, and that must be disclosed on your SOI at the Secretary of State.
For anything?
Yes,
For anybody?
for anything,
Okay.
whether it's 501c3, S Corp, C Corp, LLC, it doesn't matter.
Yeah, they just
They're
don't
all
want the.
blanketed.
They don't
So
want
I'm just a
the-
lawyer.
The CEO.
Yeah, it's kind of embarrassing that the criminal law attorney knows that and I don't. But
Well, they don't want the
I'll
president.
get over it, I guess.
They don't want the president and the treasurer to be the same, because it would be too easy for.
Yeah, it's like
money to-
self-dealing, which is the whole point. Okay, well, I'll look at that and I'll make sure it conforms if, that
I'm
can
happy
be
to
part
send
of
you a
it.
copy
Cover
of that.
the
So,
motion. I could probably
Do you
find it.
want to know that answer
so-
before you vote? Because we've waited this long, no disrespect, but I wouldn't
fine.
mind having the directors look at it as well, just because they're gonna have an insight that we wouldn't have, because we don't know what they do on a daily basis.
Sure.
But if y'all want to do it right now, I'll go along to get along, except marijuana.
I don't know. We've done this for a very long time, so I was looking forward to this being the last part of it. But if the E-staff would like to be a part of it, I'm.
Whichever you want, you guys. That's will of you guys.
George, what do you want?
You want it off your desk?
I would like it off my desk more, if we're using that as the verb, more than the E-staff would like to read it. So if that's the, I'm
Hey,
good.
E-staff, you're out.
But I'm happy to do it either way.
Okay, so there were a couple of
with the
addendums, right?
20,000.
20,000 and one other
The
iteration.
20,000 and with the flexibility to
Right.
characterize that that
CFO job,
CFO
yeah,
CEO thing.
Yeah, I mean, can I just add to that motion, just to make sure that
But
private
some-
and nonprofits are not all blanketed with the same requirements?
Correct.
No, I got you staff that want to read it over here, so let's open it up.
What?
I do have a question, just
Okay,
because
sure.
there are some people that are on this table are part of PAL and part of the board, such as myself as a
PAL,
treasurer.
yeah, okay.
So I just want to make sure that how that is impacted.
Well, that's interesting. So you're like,
So
guys
you're
are
the
officers on
CFO.
there probably? Yeah,
I'm the
okay.
treasurer, yeah. So.
You're on the loan committee too?
No, that's only the Board of Supervisors.
So just.
Why don't we
disclosure.
take it up at the next meeting after the E-staff has had a chance to look
Good
at it?
idea.
Oh my God, that's such a
Yeah,
cool
yeah,
idea.
with-
I'll
Great
move
idea.
to postpone until after the E-staff has had a chance to look at this.
We
Yeah,
have a
that's a
motion
good point.
to
Okay.
postpone
Second.
and to a certain date.
Third, next meeting.
All right. Call the roll, please. We have a motion to postpone.
Second.
Councilmember Abram?
Yes.
Councilmember Vixel?
Yes.
Vice Mayor Franco?
Yes.
Councilmember Moniz?
Yes.
Mayor Bublak?
Yes. Thank you for doing that. All right, now we move on to city manager reports and updates.
Nothing to report tonight.
All right, everything's in writing. Council items for future consideration. I'm hoping for discussion on the point in time count that should have been put out months ago, but,
I got word from Supervisor Chiesa that normally comes out in June, but he will try to get us a copy.
The last I heard is that it'll be out next week.
yeah, interesting. Okay, council comments and announcements. Councilmember Abram?
Yes, I just wanted to plug what we heard about last meeting, that Love Turlock is this Saturday, and I looked, and I'm pretty sure it's all booked out. So I hope to see everyone out there. There is definitely something for all ages. I'll be there with my kindergartner Girl Scouts, so
Sweet.
hope to see you.
8 a.m., Donnelly Park.
Yes.
Councilmember Bixel? All right, Vice Mayor?
All right. I mentioned last meeting that the farmer's market was Saturday and the maker's market was Sunday. I was sadly mistaken. They're both on Saturday. One's, the east end is the farmer's market, the west end is maker's market. So
Wasn't
I
there
went,
a
I
time
went
discrepancy?
there, now there, well, it says it opens at 8 o'clock. It actually opens at 9 next time. And then after that, it opens at 8.
Okay.
So sorry for my mistake, but it was fabulous this weekend. So please come out. May is Love to Ride month, so dust off your bicycles and download the app. Get some exercise and some fresh air. There's prizes if you ride. LoveToRide.net. Stannis Cruise on Facebook and Instagram. And finally, guess what? Pedras Road is finally getting paved.
Did you hear that, Cyrus?
Yay! Pedras is finally getting paved. Signs are up.
Smile.
Starting this week.
All right, ma'am, anything?
No, ma'am, thank you.
Okay, I'm holding up my Turlock app, so it's gonna be submitted to the App Store and will be free to download within 1 to 3 weeks. This is all verbiage that I'm reading off the back because our illustrious economic development guys tell me. So this time frame is the App Store, so if it gets skewed, we're going to blame them. And then the business directory function will be finalized and populate the app within about 6 to 8 weeks. So super cool. There'll be a QR code most likely. Pretty awesome. Looking forward to that. And thank you to the volunteers who served for us for no pay, almost like being an elected, but you know, they got cookies. Anyway, we have some closed session. Would you like to share that?
Thank you, Madam Mayor. For closed session, item 12A, conference with legal counsel, initiation of litigation, California Government Code 54956.9, subsection D4. 15B is conference with legal counsel, anticipated litigation. Oh, I'm sorry, for initiation of litigation, it's one case. For conference with legal counsel, anticipated litigation, California Government Code 54956.9, subsection D2, potential cases 2. And then we have 15C, conference with labor negotiators, California Government Code 54957.6, subsection A. And the agency designated representative is Deputy City Manager Sarah Eddy. Employee organizations are Turlock Associated Police Officers, Turlock City Employees Association, Turlock Firefighters Association, Local 2434, Turlock Management Association / Public Safety, and unrepresented groups, Turlock Management and Confidential Employees.
All right, and we will report out should there be anything. Thank you all and drive safely. Uno más.
Por favor. Yep, got him.
All right, we are back, and we have nothing to report out, so the meeting is adjourned.